Okay, this is Summoning Insight episode 44. I'm Thorin, and I consider myself like one of the good guys in esports, Monte. Like, I'm not one of those scumbags. There's a lot of them out there who, you have to worry, like, will they change their opinions and just claim they thought one thing? Do they change overnight? Good week for me in some senses. Like, we're going to talk later about Korea, and I feel like that all worked out the way I wanted to see things work out. That just resolved a little philosophical difference between the two of us. This week, actually, it's you that's been under attack, Monty. Like, we take turns with this. Like, we agreed when we were forming our evil plan as to how we would infect Western esports with like an underlying subliminal bias about TSM not in fact being the best, when that's self-evident that they are. When we were discussing our plan to do that, Monty, a long time ago, because this was planned from the get-go. This is like the Illuminati. We started this in like Bavaria in like the 1877 or something. But whenever we started this, we literally said, like, we can't both be hated at the same time. I mean, occasionally the plan didn't work. Sometimes we were hated at the same time. What we have to do is we have to take turns. Like, whenever you're beloved, that's when I have to have my moments when I draw the attention in a negative way. You're drawing the positive attention, I'm drawing the negative, and then it has to flip. Every now and then we have to have a pole reversal, and then you say something glib which is taken without context, like essentially suggesting that all of Europe is just dog shit and not even worth the time to flash in front of your eyes. I think your phrase was, you'd rather look at a wall with nothing happening on it and then go blind, then watch the EU LCS Finals. But,
I'm pretty sure that was verbatim what I said.
Yeah. It's much like those Jack Dilemma segments. It all happened, guys. So, but now I'm beloved. On the other hand, now I'm back in everyone's good graces. It's all going well. So I think, from experience, I feel like this is just the way it's going to be forever. I think it was set now. I don't have to worry anymore. I'm in the clear. I think you're in the hot seat again, and you have to prove yourself to you have to listen, Monty. You just have to tone things down and kind of like, kind of work on being a bit more likable. And when you do that, then you'll be loved as I am.
Yeah, see, it's really a good cop, bad cop relationship, except because the community has the memory of a goldfish, we can actually switch good cop and bad cop roles constantly.
Yeah. So, as we start out, let's just, we had finals in almost every region here. Some of the finals coming up, though, the Asian ones, obviously. So we'll start with the finals that have happened already. Let's just start right there, Monty, in Europe, because you made this hyperbolic statement. First of all, unpack that for me, because the way it was presented to people who only saw the Reddit headline, it sounded like you literally was saying that you didn't even watch the EU LCS Finals, or you would refuse to rewatch them, or you'd refuse to analyze them, or it was a waste of time to even analyze them. So unpack that for me a bit.
Okay, well, I did say that the EU LCS Finals were a shit show, which I think was pretty common agreement from not only people who are analysts in this scene. Forgiven said pretty much the same thing in his AMA.
His amazing AMA, by the way.
It was very funny. And also even the fans themselves acknowledged that the games were exciting. And I wasn't trying to take away from the excitement of those games or tell people, in fact, on the countdown this week, I do have that series on there because it's important for context going into MSI, and it's important to watch those games, and they were fun to watch. I like seeing different picks come up. I like seeing some of these crazy picks because we get to see how well they work in the current meta, or it gives some diversity. It's not that I didn't find the games exciting, and I did watch the games. It's just that when you ask me to analyze, let me explain, because people don't seem to understand the concept of my stream. The concept of my stream is that I am doing work that I would normally do to prepare for casts and to prepare for my shows so that I can be a professional analyst, and I am streaming that work. It's the same work that I've always done. I am streaming because I like having to articulate to people what I'm looking at, and it helps me as a caster because I get practice talking and discussing about these teams, and it forces me to put it into words, which makes my other content, either casting or this show or the countdown, more concise, more thought out, and so that's why I choose to do these streams, right? And so when I do these streams, I have to pick games. Usually I pick games that I haven't seen, or games that I have seen, but I feel like I need to go back and review one more time because they were very interesting strategically, or they contained something unique that was very effective, or they have a big effect on the current meta, or anything like that. So in those situations, I will go back and review those games. Now, I have already seen the Unicorns of Love versus FNATIC games. So I did not feel that going back and reviewing those games on stream was more valuable than, say, looking at CJ's games again, or looking at LGD's games, or looking at EDG's games, especially coming into this next week when there are more playoff matches to be had in those regions. And also these teams are operating on a higher strategic level of play. So I have to look at value in terms of what I do because I have limited time in my life. And the stream, while I'm really grateful that people enjoy it, its purpose is not to analyze whatever games you say I should analyze, because sometimes some are more valuable than others. And frankly, the EU Finals was a shit show. It was pretty random. There wasn't a whole lot, I feel, of high-level strategy to analyze in there. And when there are so many mistakes made in a game, you covered this very well in your Thorin's thoughts about the issue, where if there are so many mistakes in a game, it doesn't show that there is a cogent plan going forward. And all we can really learn from that is that these teams will take skirmishes whenever they have the opportunity, and that's about all the level of planning that goes into some of these matches.
Okay, so we're going to tie these two topics together. The general thought of how you analyze games and what is worth analyzing, and how we explain our thoughts and like what criteria we value over others, because that's a great discussion to have in the context of this final. Because when you talk about Unicorns of Love, I mean, that's a team you have to discuss things like chaotic play, as in, is it actually structured? Is there logic to it? Is it the right? Is it effective? Is it the right way? All these are topics that naturally align with it. Okay, so to start out with, before we go into the depths of that particular match, I want to just ask you this question. There's a perception of you, Monte, that yes, like the most base level I'd boil it down to is the old perception of you, Monte, which is you just suck mad Korean dick, and that everything Korean is good, and that you are sort of like you're sort of like an elitist hipster weeaboo, but about Korea and only Korean League of Legends, and that you hate everything American because it's not Korean, and that you're sort of like, yeah, man, I reject the system. I'm into like anime and like eating Pocky and stuff, whatever. That's like the most base level. But it actually even comes into the intellectual discussions about your work, Monte, which is people say, oh, it's because to Monte, you know, like everything that's not Korean sucks, and he just wants every region to be like worse versions of Koreans, and if everyone doesn't win with rotations and strategy, they're wrong, and that's the wrong way. This is like the hyperbolic, like extreme view that is drawn of you, Monte. I mean, people think of you, essentially, here's the analogy for you. People think of you as sort of like the old guy who's like, Sum 41, that's not music. Music is acid jazz played on a dulcimer in a cafe in Paris to an audience of only 20 who know exactly what he was doing and referring to African folk roots. Like, that's what they think of you as, Monte, in League of Legends terms. So please elucidate what your actual position is.
I mean, I don't even really know how to follow that up. No, my actual position is I like to see well thought out gameplay, and for that reason I actually quite enjoyed TSM versus Cloud9 in the NA finals. I think TSM did come in with some good prep and showed some good grounding in the strategy, and like I refer back to your video where you explain the difference in terms of efficiency and level of play, use that basketball analogy and everything to describe that. What my perception of the game is that there is a proper way to play this game in terms of strategy and planning in any given meta, and that's constantly evolving, of course, in terms of what is the highest percentage champions you can select given the available information on the map. What is the highest percentage play that you can make? And that tends to be pretty conservative in League of Legends because you don't want to get into a chaotic situation where you can't control necessarily what the outcome is going to be. You want to make the lowest risk, highest percentage play possible. So that pretty much always relies on vision and objective control. And what's interesting about League of Legends at the same time is that sometimes you have players that are these ultra elite players that can break out of that mode at the highest level of competition, or who can make these jaw-dropping plays that only they can make, or they're forced into a situation that they've never seen before and can be so creative on the fly that they can actually, brute force something in order to make it work. But in terms of the teamwork, you're basically always trying to go for those high percentage plays in League of Legends. And then if you have one of these superstar players, well, then you sometimes count on them to make a 1v1 out play or come up with the big solo play themselves. And that, to me, is what's exciting about the game. So it's not just Korean teams by any means. It just happens to be that the Korean teams are the best at it, and they have the history of success within this game.
Because that's something I'll get to in a second. Like, I want to develop is the idea of that sometimes high-level Asian teams, Koreans even, sometimes will do the chaotic style and will do these risky plays. So people will naturally equate that to what's going on here. But I want to give the metaphor like this. In terms of whatever, sporting game theory, or even just actually any craft in life, there's a great way that it's always described, which is that you have to learn the rules initially. Initially, there are rules which are told to you as rules because they want you to strictly follow them and learn that this is the way you do it, right? But eventually, all rules to a degree become guidelines. Once you become a master of your craft, the reason why you can then break the rules is because you know why the rule existed in the first place, and then you know why you're breaking it and what you're going to gain and what the benefit of breaking it is. So to give you an example, in writing,
also the nuances.
So to give you a writing example, if you're teaching a child how to write, you'll tell him, like, okay, at the end of every sentence, there must be a full stop here, and never start your famous ones. Don't ever start a sentence with but or and, these like join words together. But as a result, if you're like Hemingway or something, if you're writing something, then because you know that normally you never do start a sentence like that, you might do that specifically to have a special effect on the reader. Like have a sentence that's one word long, and then it has a full stop because you're trying to have a specific, break them out of a certain mold. But if you didn't have those rules and you allowed the beginner to do that way, we'd never get anywhere. We wouldn't even have a basic level of literacy. People wouldn't be able to construct simple sentences. And so the problem is, this is something I think as we discuss Unicorns of Love, we're going to have to bring up, is that when you're at a lower level, it becomes... It simply is just a fact that it can be the wrong way to play, to just make it ultra risky and ultra aggressive and to not even yourself know what you're doing, because then how do you improve, Well,
it's also that you have to have the rules in place, because otherwise everything is without meaning or without intent, right? If everything is just pure chaos and there aren't any established conventions, then you can't get deeper than the surface level, because you're always just trying to plod through to the most basic meaning, especially in terms of your example with writing or in gameplay, and that there's no development to actually, you don't have a point of comparison for anything at that point, right? So I think it's very interesting, and I wasn't trying to say anything about the players, because actually I think that it's pretty amazing that there were so many rookies in this final, and I think on an individual level, a lot of these players, particularly players like Huni, who are in their rookie seasons, are really good. It's just that they are rookies and they need some time to develop in the professional scene. And if we compare them to players who have been here for years and who are a bit more disciplined in how they play out the game in terms of their teamwork and their decision making, I think it's going to be difficult for Europe to do well on an international stage, because the players are more veteran and they're not going to be able to brute force them in the same way that happened this season. Individual talent, no question, I think, between these two teams, especially when we look at Huni, FNATIC, PowerOfEvil. I mean, these guys have really shown up this season and shown that they're all like having these incredible rookie seasons right now. And given enough time, I think they can compete on the world stage. It just might be difficult right now.
Give me some examples in the West of teams in the past that did play a chaotic or aggressive or like pressuring the opponent all the time, that didn't do it in a way that you dislike. Was there any that you enjoyed the way they did it this way, or you think that they understood the rules and when to break them, You
have to go back to Moscow 5, but at the same time, Moscow 5 had a level of innovation, especially during their prime, where you discussed this too, but we also have to remember that in Season 2, everything was far less developed than it is right now strategically, because the game was newer and people hadn't figured it out as much at that time. I mean, by the time Season 2 World Championships started to roll around, we were only just starting to get into lane swaps, which obviously had become immensely more complicated over the years. The game itself, Riot didn't have such a fine tuning on the balance at that point in time. And in fact, it was a very different game given all the season changes that have happened ever since then. The vision game wasn't there. It was nowhere near as advanced strategically as it is right now, both due to time that players and teams have spent with the game, as well as Riot itself making changes to make it more subtle and more complex. And Moscow 5 also, even then, Diamond Prox was innovating jungle picks, which we haven't really seen. The thing we've seen from Unicorns of Love that I think is innovative and has had an effect is that mid Kog'Maw, but you'll notice that there haven't really been that many other picks that have been taken up by other people and shown to be effective from other teams. Sure, we saw SK Telecom play Udyr once, and I don't think Udyr's bad. I just think he's okay, and certainly not a top-tier jungler right now. But there's not a lot of other instances of things that the Unicorns have done that have really been adopted by a lot of the other teams in the scene. So you don't see the same level of extreme impact and innovation that you had from Moscow 5, nor do you see the level of coordination that they used to have in team fights. And I think that Moscow 5 is the big team that you look at in terms of a more instinctive, intuitive style, but they were probably the best team in the world at a point in time.
Well, I mean, you could even tie this discussion of like how the game's developed into my analogy about having a rule set so that you can then break it. So in the what people don't know who are modern day players who only just started now is that in the past you could literally just buy as many wards as you want and just place them all. So as a result, if you were some godlike Korean team, well, you would just place 1 billion wards and that would be your advantage. Now, here's what's strange. You'd think, well, if you could place as many wards as you want, every great team must have been doing it. No. There were some teams that were barely placing wards because they would do what the solo queue player does. They'd think, well, why would I buy wards now? I'm close to an item. Just get the item. Or they'd forget about wards in certain roles. So here's what's weird. Having trinkets, listen, I know you like them. Personally, I'm not a fan of trinkets because I don't like the idea that if you're some godlike support, to a degree, you're limited in how many wards can be on the map. I think I like the advantage that you could place more. But what's funny is that has raised the level of vision game for players who weren't supports significantly. Because what it essentially is doing, if you think logically, is when the mid laner places it, it's almost like having a little timer that tells him when that time runs out, shouldn't you be placing a ward at some point? Whereas some of those players would never have thought to go back and buy a ward, to place it. They'd just play on in the game and that wouldn't occur to them, So also, in a strange sense, it has elevated some other aspects of the game as a general rule,
Also vision denial, when Oracle's Elixir used to be permanent up until death and it didn't have a timer on it besides your own ability to stay alive, it made clearing vision much more simple for the jungler or the support player, whereas now all the players have to think much more carefully about where they pink ward, if they switch out for a sweeping lens, and the team controls vision now. I think it's better. I mean, I understand why some people, including yourself, might like the fact that supports could place more wards because that increases, I think, the skill of the support position and their ability to roam and their timings. Because it becomes much more crucial because they can put more wards down. But I think overall, we're in a really good place right now. And
I'm saying it from a purist position, Listen, it raises the level. Like I'm saying, it raises the level of the lesser players. It raises the level of a mid laner who would never think about that himself, and is only trying to win the 1v1 lane in the past. But my problem is, I don't want someone like Mata or PYL to be limited from being able to dominate the opponent even further if he just happens to be a genius of knowing where to put wards, It's not his fault he then has to convince his mid lane to come, it just adds an extra layer into the best level that I don't want.
It does. It does take, I think, to a certain degree, the onus off of one player and put it on the team instead. That's true.
Okay, so tying back into the Unicorns of Love series here. Unicorns of Love got to 5 games in the final mode. Could Unicorns of Love be the champions of Europe?
Clearly they could have been. And I think what I would liken this back to is the KT Arrows run in Champion Summer last year. It was very clear that the KT Arrows would take risky engagements, that they would do things without full vision control, and that they were very famous for this kind of scrappy skirmish style that was sort of high risk, medium reward. But it's important to note too that in a very similar circumstance to the Unicorns of Love, we were looking at a team that kind of went to 5 games every single series, right? That they were coming.
It was 3-1 in the first one, Gambit.
Yeah.
But other than that, no, even that was close. Obviously, yeah.
No, I'm talking about the Arrows.
Oh, the Arrows, yeah, they were 3-2 in every series. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's why it's a good parallel, because it was both times
Right.
they could have lost all these series.
Right. And I think that to date, most people, you, me included, think that they're probably the worst team to ever win a season of champions. And then they immediately went through and just got absolutely destroyed by Naj and White Shield during the very, like, a couple weeks after that event happened, because their style was high risk, high reward. And when you play that, or not even high reward, it's like high risk, medium reward, right? The reward is not really that great. But if people can play around your lack of vision and they know that you'll make aggressive plays, because basically what you do in that scenario is that you come into the game, and this is my theory, is you come into the game and you say, okay, if especially the jungler like Cacao, what lanes can I gank? Where's my highest percentage of kill? And they go to that lane, and then whether or not they know where the enemy jungler is, for all they know, the enemy jungler could be sitting there waiting to counter gank, they will make an aggressive play on that lane. It's like, if they can tower dive, if they can get the kill, they will. So as long as you can just guess where they think the highest percentage play is, it's actually a very counterable strategy, and you can get absolutely dominated. And I also think that KT Heroes were like ridiculously lucky to win that best of 5 against Blue. And especially if we go back to that game 4, if Cacao wasn't an ultra superstar jungler, there's no way they win that game. He basically entirely put the team on his back in game 4 and dominated Samsung Blue. And they had to have that ridiculous like brush turnaround in the river by Baron too. It was very unlikely that they were going to win that series.
I'll take it further, Monty. It's not just that they almost lost the final; they almost finished 5th to 8th. When they played Naj and White Shield in that best of 5, in the 5th game, the blind pick, they were losing initially. So they almost lost again there. There's a period where Naj and White Shield took a slight lead, and then KT Arrows got some great fights and they got the game back. Okay, they won the game. It was mainly mid lane fights, but actually Naj and White Shield could have beaten them then, just put them out 5th to 8th. Instead, we have a total reversal of fortune. They win the whole league. And secondly, so the reason I make that point there, by the way, is that even one of the best examples ever of that chaotic style, won by the narrowest margin imaginable, might not have won. And then secondly, let's make it clear we are not conflating Unicorns of Love with KT Arrows, because I've seen this a lot. Okay, people were trying before to mention that they were like Moscow 5. Do not attempt to pretend like what Unicorns of Love is doing in Europe now is just like what KT Arrows did. Now, in the context of the regions, maybe, but they're not even close to similar teams, because for a start of, when KT Arrows did it, they were doing it against Samsung Blue, one of the best teams at being able to play intelligently ever.
And so, also the invent, pretty much they've done more to refine the lane swap than any other team in history.
They weren't doing it against Gambit, against FNATIC now, okay, here's a bold statement for you, Monty. Are you ready? I actually think that one of the things that people are not downplaying enough about the Unicorns of Love's performance, I've just given them props there. They almost won the league, it's true. But you know what? They almost went out every single round of the playoffs. Okay, I'll say that they'll beat Gambit, because Gambit wanted to play their style and didn't play well. Even the Gambit series, I think you can make a case that Gambit could still have won it. But the other series, SK could definitely have won that. I'm not saying they would have, but there were chances for SK too, certainly.
It's the same situation, especially in that Game 5 versus SK, where they screwed up on that Baron. But had they gotten that Baron, the odds of SK winning go to 98%.
So here's my bold statement, Monty. When I look at the teams that were in the playoffs, in terms of the meta of what teams were available, I think it was a really good setup of teams in terms of Unicorns of Love. I think they had a really good chance against all these teams. If the bracket had been different and H2K had played Unicorns of Love, I would bet my life H2K would win that best of 5.
I agree.
I think they would punish the fuck out of that style. That's why H2K almost beat FNATIC when FNATIC were doing some of that shit.
Yeah.
So I think H2K would have put the nail. So I don't think, so to put it simply, I don't think Unicorns Love's the second best team in Europe. So now people can say I'm hating, but I think that's the case.
No, I agree with you. And also it's important to note too that there's a difference between Unicorns of Love that has all these rookie players and teams that we're talking about. When we talk about Moscow 5 in their prime, we're talking about a team that had some of the most dominant players at their positions in the world, especially Diamond Brox, players like Diamond Brox and Alex Ich. And these guys were veterans. Like by the time they had already been playing together for 6 months by the time season 2 World rolls around, or longer, you know what I mean? And also, if we look at the KT Arrows, I mean, Kakao is he was a super veteran jungler in the Korean scene by the time the KT Arrows won. He had been around, Sunday had been around for a long time. So it's not really the same comparison. Even FNATIC, that does tend to play, so I think that they, against other teams, and we can talk about this more, I guess, in a little bit about how I think FNATIC's going to do at MSI. I think FNATIC kind of got brought down to the Unicorns of Love's level. I don't think they normally play at that. They do play a scrappy, skirmish-based style, but not.
Oh, wait a second, you've died. We just said, like, I think where you cut off was you were saying that FNATIC do play a scrappy style, and then, so continue from there.
All right, FNATIC do play that scrappy style. I think they did get sucked into the Unicorns of Love's chaos to a certain degree. But they also, again, have this veteran player in Yellowstar who's been around the scene for forever, has been doing so well in the EU LCS. Obviously, I'm just going to say it, the best Western support of all time, just, especially in terms of his results. So they have that advantage. The point is that they have all these veteran players on these teams that were playing in a similar style to the Unicorns of Love. And while the Unicorns of Love have shown some impressive results, very, very genuinely as a bunch of rookie players, it's still not really in the same category.
Plus, when I made that analogy in my video, the basketball analogy of the same, it was the same analogy, by the way, as what I gave about the writing. The notion was, if you really are a master, you can then break the rules. And in fact, sometimes in that specific instance, it might actually be more beneficial in the short term to break the rule there. So in the basketball analogy, sometimes it is better to have Michael Jordan take a shot with 2 people in his face than to have a worse player on his team take an open shot. Like that, on a game theory level, that's incorrect, because you are. The problem with the perfect scenario is you assume that the player would make the shot and at what his normal shooting percentage is, but in a real game, maybe it wouldn't. And so, to use the same analogy, in Moscow 5, they have prime Diamond Procs, prime Alex Ich, like some of the best players in the world at their position. So if their style is they want to play aggressively, they're on aggressive champions, and they're facing a team where that can work, then it actually does make sense to turn them loose. It doesn't make sense for Moscow 5 to be like, right, we've got a small advantage, like, don't team fight now, like, rotate and take this tower. Like, actually, they can break that rule if they want. And at the time, it wasn't actually a rule, but in our modern context. Likewise, if you're on KT Arrows, well, if you have Kakao and he's already 3-0 up on like Rengar or Nocturne or something, no, you're not just going to play super safe and manage that goal. You're going to make more plays and you're going to dominate the game. But the problem is, when it's done with a superstar player, it's more forgivable, or it can even be the right play in a way it isn't. So I'll give you an example. We'll use a direct example for Unicorns of Love. We can all see from even the games Unicorns of Love are playing in this playoffs, which is their best performance, that sometimes Kikis makes a play and it turns out to be a good play, as in the result of it is good, but it wasn't necessarily the right play. And you know how you know that? Because he makes another play of similar risk reward 2 minutes later and it goes totally wrong and fucks up and he dies and teammate dies. So even within these games we can see where it's not like it's not like they've discovered some secret strategy that just is the new way to play and is going to be better. Even their own style only lets them barely win or barely lose.
Right, and also I think it's when we go back to the KT Arrows too, there's a difference, because when the KT Arrows came into the Samsung Blue finals, they basically played the same team comp, like, 4 games in a row? I mean, it's a lot of it was Samsung Blue failing to adapt, but you could see when KT Arrows came in, there was like a very concrete plan of the champions that they wanted to pick. I don't really see that. Sure, KT Arrows they played Riven top, and it was terrible in that finals as well, right? And you still see the wacky picks from Unicorns of Love, some of which are very effective, some of which are moderately effective, some of which Jungle Nar I think are crap. But I think the KT Arrows showed more of a plan coming into that series that Samsung Blue failed to adapt to more than anything else, and just kind of letting them play it over and over and over again.
Like, to give, one of the most famous examples of this brilliant cheese that Unicorns of Love do, and it was an innovative approach, was when they played that game against TSM, and they locked in. First of all, they tricked TSM by taking the TF as the jungle pick, and so they tricked Bjergsen into getting himself counterpicked, which a team like TSM or Elements, etc. in general, they always want to counterpick the mid lane since it's the best player, you know. They tricked them there, and then, remember what the play was, Monte. to flash in and gold card Bjergsen to get a kill for his mid laner. Now, if you think that was just some genius drawn-up plan where they knew exactly where he'd be, how they'd do it, and that they definitely land the gold card, they definitely get the kill and snowball, then you are incredibly naive about the strategy. Because if that worked, hey, fuck it. Why doesn't IG just do that now with Cacao? Just have him flash in, land like a Nidalee spear on someone, and then instantly get the kill every time, and then always snowball his mid lane. Hey, it's easy, isn't it? Just do that every time. That is an incredibly low. That is a low reward. Well, it's a high reward. That's an incredibly high reward, but an incredibly high risk play. Because imagine if he fucks that up. Now he has no flash. He's TF, and his mid laner isn't ahead.
He falls behind, and there's nothing you can do. And there are also teams that you can do this better against than others. When we think about TSM, they're a team that doesn't adapt well in game. TSM is actually historically been a team that's very easy to cheese because their shot calling falls apart when they don't have an idea, even if it's pretty easy to figure out on the fly, like, well, if he's playing TF, if he falls behind, we're pretty much going to win this game, so let's just play conservatively. TSM doesn't do that very well. Remember, I mean, there's the Jungle TF, the Swain versus the SK game that they played at Worlds. They are a team that doesn't adapt well in game to surprises. So I think that cheesing TSM is a perfectly valid strategy that has proven to work on many different occasions. But yes, I agree what you're saying about that Jungle TF. It was effective in that game because the high risk play worked. But you can't. There's a reason why Jungle TF wasn't meta at that time.
Because I kind of made this point that the problem with this, once we take this to an international level, if Unicorns of Love had gone to MSI, for example, which was a real possibility from how the game's played, was that certain teams they would have faced, that style not only... Here's the thing, against certain teams it does give you a fighting chance. Against some teams it ensures you have no chance. Like if Unicorns of Love played a best of 5 against EDG, their style, which they would attempt to try, would get so brutalized that it wouldn't be this exciting style that you guys want to see. You'd see them go into the jungle and try and make a play and that would just get them killed very early, then killed again, and they would get so brutalized that they'd never even have a team fight that could work. Some of these wacky picks would look like the shit that those picks are, where if they don't work, the problem is they're going to be total crap. Like imagine an Udyr that's down 3 kills and hasn't got any of his lanes rolling. That game's over already. He can't do anything. He's not going to do shit. And he's versus like fucking Sejuani or something. Oh, good luck with that.
I think that the Udyr can work if you're in a composition where all you want to do is kite, and therefore you can stun multiple targets as Udyr. But his effectiveness is limited to the kind of composition that you have. So it's a narrow focus, I would say. And with FNATIC with Unicorns of Love, sure, they may be able to surprise people in best of ones, right? At an international competition. FNATIC could very well do the same. FNATIC's style of chaotic play, if we look at the course of the series between FNATIC and Unicorns of Love, most of these games were pretty one-sided. I mean, you see one team getting way more kills than the other one, right? And if you constantly fight, then whichever team starts to get an advantage just snowballs out of control, because as soon as you have an item advantage in some of these team fights, there's pretty much no way, if you continue to constantly fight against your counterpart, if you're constantly dueling with mid laners and one mid laner gets an edge, it's just going to snowball almost all the time in favor of the mid laner who has an advantage. Like, you can't come back into games like that unless you have some sort of really insane outplay, right?
Like, what's interesting about these playoffs, if we're going to talk about Unicorns of Love, let's talk about the star player. So we're going to talk about PowerOfEvil. Because the way the playoffs played out, this particular split, was very interesting, because almost every single team, the mid laner was, as expected in Europe, like a key part of it. And we got to see all these great matchups. We got to see Ryu versus Febiven versus PowerOfEvil versus Fox, and we got to see how all these guys played out. Now, because PowerOfEvil was one game from winning LCS and he made the final and all the rest of it, I know people are going to want to say, right, hey, maybe PowerOfEvil's the best mid in Europe. Hey, he's done an elite job. Now, his playoffs were very good. He had some really good games. But if I had to put my money, after seeing these playoffs, Like you notice I purposely said playoffs there, so we don't even have to bring in the whole is Froggen. We're not even going to touch that one here, guys. I'm not going to belabor that now. So we'll just pretend that playoffs are all that existed. If I had to put my money down right now, best 2 EU mid laners, I'm sorry, but I would pick Febiven and Ryu. Like, if I look at how they played and the way they played on the champions that worked for them, I know what's reliable about these guys. I know how they're going to play, and their performance is consistent. It is reliable. Whereas the problem I had with PowerOfEvil was, first of all, he has a couple of picks he's excellent on. He has some good picks, but he actually seems to be one of those guys where I don't think he plays that well from behind. Like, actually, I mean, Unicorns Love in general had a problem with that, but when he's behind, he's actually not this crazy aggressive wild that the whole team's build as. He can sometimes play a bit more just staid, like once he's down 1 or 2 kills, you kind of know where it's going to go in that game.
Right, but that's the thing, is that when you constantly fight, that's what I was saying, if you get behind and you continue fighting, it's very hard not to just get snowballed against, which is why a lot of the FNATIC Unicorns of Love games were so one-sided. Whoever got an early advantage mostly was the one, except for in game 1, really, was the one who closed it out.
What is your thought?
Fucked up that Baron.
What is your thoughts about PowerOfEvil though? Where do you kind of rank him?
I think he's a good player. I think that some of his picks are a little bit more scattershot. Like the mid Varus, I don't see it as necessarily, and I think it's just kind of like a worse version of the Kog'Maw. So he has been innovative in the way that we have seen, including TSM, playing this mid Kog'Maw more, and I do think it's strong with the new Luden's Echo. But sometimes the mid Varus, I think, is so risky because of his immobility and the fact that if you don't get armor pen on him, he's just absolute crap in the late game. And the Kog'Maw cooldown build with Luden's Echo is more reliable in terms of poke and in terms of damage.
His mid Kog'Maw was impressive. He's one of the few people who's making it work.
It's good. I mean,
for him, it's legit. Good. Yeah. But here's the thing also about PowerOfEvil. I make this case all the time. One of the things whenever you're talking about people who use cheese, and in this case, we're not saying PowerOfEvil's cheese, but his picks in a way are cheese. Like they're non-meta, and some of them are just one-offs that he's going to use against you. Part of the problem is, it's not like he's a god at those, and then he has all the meta champions, so he's just got the complete arsenal. He can do whatever he wants, and he'll dominate completely. It says something about his game that he's not a god on the meta champs at mid right now. He doesn't just have the whole arsenal of the meta champs. Now, I think that's telling in a way. Like, he's good at these unusual ones and weird matchups, and he does have a couple of meta champs. Like, listen, people do play Cassiopeia mid. That's not like some totally bizarre pick. But where are his other ones? Like, where are all the other super meta picks right now?
I don't really know what he's doing. It seems to me that he's spending too much time trying to figure out how mid Varus can work instead of really trying to understand a lot of the meta picks.
I mean, what's funny is to go the other way. I actually felt like the other way around. If we're looking at the Febiven side of things, Febiven, if anything, got in trouble the other way around when he would try and do the picks that right now are just super strong, that are just weird meta things right now. I didn't think they worked that well. If he just stuck to the standard ones, you'd expect him to play those assassins. Then he was great. Like he got into trouble when he tried to get too cute. When he tried to play like a Cho'Gath or something. That's when I didn't really enjoy that much. The Febiven world.
I mean, his Kassadin wasn't that impressive this series either, even though Kassadin has been seeing a lot of play in China as of late and doing quite well. He didn't show up as big, but that's a champion that takes a long time to scale because you have to get that Rod of Ages and then you have to get the Athenes and you're working on a lot of scaling items after that. So he couldn't have as much of an effect in the early game, whereas we look at what he played in the series like Ahri, where you could have some more roaming in the mid game, and Ahri just comes online earlier, right? Because you're not buying a Rod of Ages that takes 10 minutes to come into its own.
I mean, just for his team and for his style of play, I want to see Febiven on Zed, Ahri, LeBlanc. These are the champions where
his TF was fine too.
Yeah, it was all right.
It was okay.
So, let me ask you this. So FNATIC just won, and FNATIC's an organisation that obviously can offer players a lot, so it's unlikely any of these players would go elsewhere and go to other teams. But hey, Unicorns of Love is a new organisation. In fact, there's some dodgy thing there where I'm not even sure they have an organisation, like they went solo or something, so I'm not even sure how it's funded or structured. In a world, hypothetically, Monte, where we could move PowerOfEvil to another team, what would you think if PowerOfEvil was like the CLG mid laner, or the Dignitas, whatever team we're going to put him on? Curse mid laner, I guess. Yeah, why not? The Liquid mid laner. Well, what would you think if we moved PowerOfEvil to one of these big name NA teams? Would he do well? Would he thrive?
I don't know. Like you're saying, I think that there's a concern that he doesn't play the meta champion, so I don't know how that speaks to his perception of the game or his mentality, because I think you can only get away with those kind of picks for so long until your pocket picks become unviable in the current meta, like just totally terrible, and then you can't play what is kind of normally expected of you. I think he is very fundamentally talented, though. So
Yeah, he's clearly got a skilled player, isn't he?
yeah, so I think that if you had him in the right coaching system, that he would be a good pickup where he could still innovate to a certain degree, but had a bit more reliability in terms of the current meta.
What type of a team would he ideally be suited for, do you think?
I guess when I look at PowerOfEvil, I'm mostly impressed by his control play. So we look at these long range champions like Syndra or Kog'Maw, where he can get in a lot of poke and play that kind of a game, right? Or even Orianna or something like that, right? So if you're going to be looking at a player with this kind of champion pool, I mean, he played Ziggs in this series as well, and this more poke style of play, or this more zone style of play rather than an assassin style of play, I think that CLG would be an extremely good fit for him, actually, because I think CLG moving forward has to be more concerned with their side lanes and having a player who can reliably output damage from a long range. They don't need somebody to go in the mid lane, right?
Yeah.
I think you want to put PowerOfEvil. I think one of the reasons why he does so well is that Hylissang is an engaged support. He doesn't have to be an engaged mid laner. They get their engage out of primarily the support position. That's why Hylissang, we saw the bans in game 1 coming with the Morgana Annie ban and the first pick Thresh, which I thought was perfectly fine, and that's not the reason why Fnatic lost that game. In fact, they were up early until that really ridiculous Baron call when all they had to do was outlast the opposition and play conservatively till they got an even bigger gold lead than the 3 to 4K, but they made a very risky and unnecessary Baron call. So Hylissang has been the one setting up most of the Unicorns fights throughout these playoffs, and his skill shot accuracy has been very important to the team. So if we consider the fact that that Aphromoo is also an engaged support, I think that says a lot about how he would synergize with that particular group of players.
So going beyond the mid lane matchup, which to me was like the marquee matchup in terms of the players in that final, one area where, I mean, you can obviously call this a mismatch, is that Huni has been like the revelation of this split. This guy's come in and he's had above and beyond the level you'd expect from him. His opposite number on H2 Unicorns level. How did you think Huni's effect was on the final? Was it what you anticipating? Because obviously in the semi-final he had a few missteps at sometimes.
I actually think that besides on the Rumble, Huni was relatively underwhelming in this series, and that was part of the issue. I think that Huni in the playoffs has either been limited by his champion selections, but he's also been heavily targeted with bans in the series that Fnatic has played, sometimes drawing as many as 3 in a game, right?
You think that's the right approach?
For Fnatic?
No, for the other team.
For the other team to ban out Huni?
Is he the guy you'd be shutting down if you could?
I would. I mean, I wouldn't be as worried about Steelback. Fabivin also draws a lot of bans. I mean, we see those LeBlanc bans. We see those Zed bans constantly. And Fnatic took a different approach with 2 mid bans than we saw the games where Unicorns of Love played against SK, where SK was more concerned with Huni. And that just goes to show that it's difficult to ban against Fnatic because H2K rather went against Fnatic, excuse me. Their bans against Huni, that these guys have carry potential. And I think this contrasts to SK, where if you ban a couple AD carries and then first pick one against Forgiven, that no one else steps up to carry, right?
Yeah.
But Fnatic, Unicorns of Love saw the series that they played against H2K. H2K banned the top lane champions, and Fnatic was still able to carry through. Same thing happened here. They try and ban out one top laner, usually, and they banned consistently Zed and LeBlanc, and yet Fnatic was still able to come through, especially with Huni's performances on his Rumble. So
That's also where the matchup itself was a good matchup in terms of to give Unicorns Love a chance to win. Is that the team they're facing was one that had favoured certain champions quite specifically, and so if we want to be a team that's going to get rid of certain champions, well then we ourselves can't play those champions. But if they're super meta picks, well if we need a team that can play stuff that's not super meta and can go with other things, Unicorns Love fits the bill, so they're even suited to be in a world where they can target like that. It's not like they're banning. It's not like a Kuros type scenario where he has to ban out his own champions and then he's fucked, you know.
Yeah.
So in this final, it sounds like you were actually a bit underwhelmed by FNATIC.
I mean, I thought they would dominate much harder than they actually ended up dominating. So I think that was interesting. It was a bit surprising. I didn't really see them coming in quite so weak or willing to take so many risks. I mean, especially watching that game one, they had no wave clear. I mean, they didn't even have the best composition. They had very little wave clear, but they still had a gold lead, and then they just take this Baron that's totally unnecessary. And the way to play against a team like Unicorns of Love is just to play very, very defensively until they make a mistake and then just destroy them for it. Because you know they're going to make a mistake eventually. And that's an extremely efficient way to play against a team that takes so many risks. And instead, FNATIC decides to take this risk on the Baron, which they're going to be outscaling. They're in a really good position in terms of gold, and then they get wrecked for it. I didn't get that. I don't understand FNATIC as to why they would play so in such a risky manner in these games.
Does Unicorns of Love making this series a 3-2 as well? Does that like elevate their status for you? Like, I mean, it was easy on the initial rounds, especially because of how cheesy they did play, to be like, okay, that won't work long term. Like that won't work against other opponents. You know, like this will level out. Did they seem more legit now, Unicorns of Love? Is this like replicatable going forwards?
What I think about the Unicorns of Love and where they show the most promise is that when they have one of these weird picks. Okay, when they have the Varus, when they have the Kog'Maw, they are very aware of the item power spikes on these champions. And one thing that the Unicorns of Love do well is play around item power spikes and try and force some of their advantages at those timings. And including if we discuss their first game, we try and go back to this. I was impressed against SK with their first game 1 in the best of 5 against SK, because I think in that particular game, they played extremely well around the power spikes of AP Kog'Maw, and they had a good idea about when to push their advantage in that game, and they played it out very cleanly also. So I do think that there is potential in this team, but they just have a lot more refinement to go through. But if you're going to make a weird pick, at least an introductory pick. I think the AP Kog'Maw, like I said, is good, and I think we'll see more of it. But they come into the match knowing what the strengths of that AP Kog'Maw are, and then they play to that. They can play to that well.
If you're Unicorns of Love, one of the criticisms that can be laid at your feet is like lack of stars, lack of a legitimate players who are going to be the best in their regions at their positions. You know, okay, PowerOfEvil's a contender, but I think once you go beyond that, okay, Hylissang played in the playoffs like someone who's a contender for that, but okay, we haven't seen that many games of him actually doing it. Okay, well, how he would continue on. So we only know that he's strong on like a few champions, right? So Morgana, Leona,
and they're
previously Thresh.
Yeah, Thresh. Did win with Braum, but I mean, I don't think his Braum was particularly exciting. His disengaged supports don't exist, and that's a team style thing too. You know, if you want to play with, if you want to have a playmaker as a support and have your support be engaged, that's a perfectly viable style to play League of Legends. There are plenty of teams that have done that and been successful.
So when you go forward,
it's a little weird that he doesn't play Nautilus though. That's weird.
If you go forwards from where we are now, if you were just as like a GM, what moves would you make to improve Unicorns of Love? Which positions should be on the chopping block or considered, or trying to get an upgrade here, or trying to change something about this player?
I don't think that I would be too excited to change out players at this point. I think what the Unicorns of Love need more than anything else is a strong coach to rein in some of their players' desires to do these wacky picks.
Okay, because I feel well done there, Monte. Rein in, yeah, well done. Yeah. Okay.
I don't really feel like we even know what the Unicorns are capable of because they haven't come in with we don't know what a Unicorns team with a more explicit game plan even really looks like. And I think that they lack on the inside an ability to distinguish between which weird picks are good and which weird picks are okay and which weird picks are bad. And they do it just for the surprise factor. So I don't even know if I could give an honest evaluation of which players can be replaced until we see them play with more direction, really.
Is it a concern for you that if you were to remove players from the lineup might get more skilled, but they also might then lose one of their only strengths, which is this strange, unique style, which is because obviously some of that can come from different players. So would that be a concern for you that they wouldn't be able to have that style as much if they remove certain players?
No, because I don't think that style is going to be effective. I think that when you play that style, sometimes you have a deep run and you get lucky, like we saw with the KT Arrows, but most of the time you just get bodied, like we saw with the KT Arrows just a couple weeks after their champions win up against Nauch and White Shield. It's not a consistently successful style, which is why you see there's no real team that you can point to in the world that is a high-level team where you're like, this team is getting more chaotic. They're getting more surprising. They've got more wacky picks. When has that ever happened in League of Legends?
Gravity.
God. I mean, at the top level.
The NA Unicorns of Love, as I call them. Okay, so let me ask you this then, Monte. If you're saying that like it wouldn't work, okay, I invoke the right of prophecy, call forth the oracle, and then Monte puts on his white robe. He is cleansed by the indigenous women that he has in his cave. They come forward, they place the holy sacrament, the drug, upon his tongue. He goes into his frenzied state, his eyeballs roll up white, much like if he's like trying to watch Chinese LPL play or something, and they go for a crazy bar fight. So you get into that state, Monte, that particular like almost somnambulant between sleeping and awake, this trance state to contact the spirit world. In this state, I need you to predict now. Does that mean that, in a sense, Unicorns of Love was a one-off? It was a fluke. I know you don't know the lineups yet. You don't know what will happen. But in the summer split, Monte Cristo says Unicorns of Love should be expected to finish about where?
Middle of the pack. Maybe
first round of the playoffs?
Yeah, quarterfinals. That's my prediction.
That's it. Order will be restored. Entropy will take care of this whole scenario,
Well, I just think too that Europe is going to look probably pretty different in the summer split. Obviously, with Elements going through a lot of changes right now, and this is all. Who knows what's going to happen in terms of the rosters? If all the rosters suddenly shatter and go to shit, then maybe that could happen. That the Unicorns will make back-to-back finals. But
Monte, I've got to correct you. When you say if all the rosters shatter and go to shit. Like, that's the problem you've got there, Monte, is you're imagining a scenario where it could get worse. Like, I actually think that if you took every lineup, in my opinion, except FNATIC, H2K, and SK, you took all the other lineups, so we'll take 6 of them because we're leaving Unicorns of Love out. You take the other 6 teams, and you put all the names into a hat, and you were about to pick them out and start making teams, but I accidentally knocked your arm and the bag went on the floor and you just had to pick them up, and when the first 5 you pick up's a team, the next 5, I think it would be better than it currently is right now, Monty. So I don't think it's possible. I think it can only get better at this point, Monty. So I'm on your side with this bet. I think it's a good bet.
Yeah.
I think the odds favour you in this scenario. Especially as I don't think that what you said will happen, that they're going to get this strong coaching figure. I mean, in your world, they're going to get that, like, John Wayne, hard-nosed cowboy who just, gosh darn it, you're going to play the right way. He's going to come in. There's going to be a bit of carrot and stick with the Unicorns there. He's going to rein them in. He's going to tame the wild stallion that is, Unicorns of Love. He's going to have them playing Hecarim, but in a responsible manner. Don't play Hecarim in an irresponsible manner, guys. This just doesn't work. I think we've learned that from watching some of the players in LPL. And we're going to fix Unicorns. I don't think that'll happen. I actually think, if anything, this is the bad thing about fans blowing up Unicorns Love. They did do well and they had a great Cinderella run. But again, it was a Cinderella and they didn't win. So if that's your best case scenario, I don't really like that myself. And going forwards, people love the style and they love everything about it and how kitsch and how quirky and quaint they are. Well, that's the scenario where I think they'll keep things the same and they'll try the same approach next year and they'll keep the same players. And I don't see it going better than it did now. And in fact, I could easily see it going worse.
Yeah,
so bring the salt to me. I don't give a fuck. Yes, I also hate fun and all the rest of it. Yeah, whatever. I don't like wacky stuff. So,
but the EU fans, they love wacky pink unicorns and jungle Nars.
Well, no, if you remember, the sort of consensus opinion about this final was like, finally, a great final in Europe. What a great series this was. I was really enjoying it. And it was like, yeah, well, obviously, that's because, to give an analogy, okay, in the UFC, sometimes the title fights are the most boring fights. Like, there are some divisions in which there hasn't been like an actual finish in a title fight for like years and years at a time. Like the champion wins with a convincing decision performance where he neutralizes the strength of the opponent. It emphasizes a key strength of his without taking a wild risk, but that is never going to be as exciting to the average Just Bleed type fan as like just a crazy brawl where people are just like, I'm willing to give you 2 punches on my chin to get 2 punches in on you. Like, that style will be more exciting, but it won't be high level fighting, and also it'll be worse in terms of trying to be the best for either person. There's very few people can become the best doing that.
Right, and also I think that for American sports fans too, the way you can sort of look at some of these games is the difference between the NFL and college football. Where in college football, sometimes you have these crazy quarterbacks who are Heisman winners, and they can run all over the field, and they can throw these long bombs, and you get these games that have like 60 points in them in college, and everything's crazy, and just these spectacular big yardage gains and 80-yard touchdown runs and everything like that. But if you look at the NFL, it's a more refined game, and it's much more rare to have somebody who can do that. And in fact, a lot of these dual threat quarterbacks do very poorly in the NFL, because even though it's super fun to watch them carve up the field by running and then throw some of these passes, it just doesn't work against good defensive players and good defensive schemes in the NFL, because it makes it so, especially that the quarterback is at very high risk of injury on every play. Like, there is a high risk coming into those plays that your quarterback is just laid out for the rest of the season, because he's not going to be able to abuse a lesser strategy in the same way, right?
There's an opinion I've seen mentioned. This is not a one-off, okay? I've seen this mentioned many times. I've seen it even quite upvoted, and people agreed with it, which was that when when people get into this area where they try to claim that a game that's messy in the West would be analyzed differently by you than a game that's seemingly messy in Korea, for example. I've heard it said many times that if you took the nameplates off the players, that you wouldn't be able to tell which was which, Monty. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference between like Katie Arrow's messy fight and Unicorns of Love messy fight. What do you think of this?
I'm sorry, you cut out there. What?
People suggest that if we took the nameplates off a messy fight from Europe and a messy fight from Korea, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between. What do you think?
No, you could definitely tell the difference, and it wouldn't just be a fight. Especially looking at an entire game, because I think you said it very well in your video that when you look at strategy, the way that I look at the game is you have to look at the team compositions, and you have to look at the decision making of the team and decide where the high risk plays were, what the turning points of those games are. But when you get into a play like Unicorns of Love, where there's a turning point in the game 20 times, 25 times, or a lot of the LPL games too, frankly, over the course of the game, you can't possibly account for all of those variables. And in my mind, that's poor play, that's poor preparation, and that's poor discipline and strategy within the game itself. So to say that you couldn't tell the difference between a game, I think is ludicrous, because the Korean games tend to have fewer moments of these high-risk plays. Generally speaking, obviously, there are exceptions, like the KT Heroes were famous for doing that. I mean, even in the finals, there was one moment between Blue and the Arrows where Kakao was going to gank top lane. I remember this very clearly, and I sat there as he's walking up into this lane. I said, he's got no vision of the enemy jungle. He has no idea where they are. I don't think he's going to do it. And then I immediately say, no, it's KT Heroes. Of course he's going to do it. And then he does it, and it works, and they get a kill. But it's still, you can see the risk involved there. So if you know how teams are playing the game at the highest level, at the level where they're minimizing their risk, I think you can definitely tell a difference between top teams. Otherwise, I mean, that's the only tool we have for analysis, right?
The most infuriating example, though, Monte, is people who will talk about like aggressive play and skirmish play and wanting to fight a lot, and they'll invoke Samsung White, and they'll say, well, Samsung White won Worlds doing that. It's like, first of all, they didn't do that all the time. Secondly, they played meta champions. Thirdly, they had some of the best mechanical players to ever touch League of Legends.
Yeah, and fourthly, they were known for their vision and control in the early game to make those high percentage plays. Monte's vision control was extraordinary in the early game, and he had the necessary information. He worked really well with Dandy in order to set that up so they could make they could take plays that didn't have a lot of risk and then mechanically outplay somebody. You have to have that train of thought, right? It's like, I can mechanically outplay somebody. I'm better than them on an individual level, but I am first going to make sure that it's not going to be a counter gank because I have a ward here, so that play becomes closer and closer and closer to 100% success rate. And that is what Samsung White did.
It also needs to be imperative that it's not... Okay, Unicorn's Love isn't predictable, as in you don't know where they'll come and what they'll do there, but it's predictable that they will try to force the action. So you are always aware that this will be their plan of attack. That is not the case with Samsung White, because the key thing with Samsung White is they are such exceptional players that it's like the analogy I gave before. They've learned the rules. If Samsung White want, they can just play a standard, incredibly boring meta game where they just do a 2v2 bot lane, and they do just play out the laning phase, and they don't do any crazy ganks, and they will still win. Therefore, you are never even certain when they will skirmish, when they will force fights, and therefore it's a strategic advantage that they can choose when to do it. They're not going to do it every time, though. Like, I don't ever want to hear anyone suggest that Samsung White was like some ridiculous late season 3 Chinese team tower diving with 4 people all the time. Like, they were not that level of ridiculous non-stop balls to the ball. They just picked the controlled aggression, you know.
Yes, I think that's important to note. That's very important to note. And Samsung White's issues that we didn't even see at Worlds, and everybody, this is what kind of blows my mind, is that everybody's still on this train like Samsung White, the best team ever, blah. You know, they didn't have any flaws, blah. But it's like for most of the season, they did show flaws in the late game. That's why Blue was able to beat them in 2 best-of-5s, in 2 straight seasons, in 2 semifinals. Was that Samsung White, sometimes they didn't have the best Baron calls late in the game. Sometimes they didn't have the best team fighting. The fact of the matter is that we didn't even really see Samsung White go to the ultra late game at Worlds. They were so good at what they did in the early game that it never even got to that point. But I theorize that Samsung White still had the same flaws from before. They just refined their early and mid game to the point where they had leads that they couldn't lose with, as opposed to earlier when Samsung Blue would make some big comebacks on them in the late game through team fighting.
Also, there was nothing comparable. Here's the thing, for people who've only watched Worlds, you have a really distorted view of Samsung White. They were a very good team, but let's put it this way. They were never in an OGN best of 5 doing super BM picks in game 1 and then super BM picks in game 2. They might do it in like game 3 if they were already up 2-0, but they're not doing it in like they're not like, oh, we're playing SK Telecom, just pick crazy late scaling shit and invade like constantly. Like, that's not happening in fucking OGN. No. The whole point is
it also didn't happen versus Samsung Blue at Worlds because it seemed like they were the only team that White actually took seriously.
Like, you have to realize that whole tournament was like a scaled up version of SK Telecom or All-Stars, where the whole thing was styling on people. It's like you were never actually seeing them just like playing seriously all the time, their best, only doing the same thing. They were like, we're going to beat everyone every game, therefore do whatever the fuck you want and BM them if necessary. So don't take that as like that was the pinnacle that a League of Legends team has ever played. Look how they played, children. Learn how to play like this. Pick Kassadin and then attack constantly within the first 5 minutes and invade their job. Like, no, you would never teach children based on those games that they played in that tournament.
No. And it's also worth mentioning that while it may not be true this year, for the last 2 years, for Season 3 and Season 4, OGN Champions was a much more difficult tournament to win than World Championship.
Sure. You know, Monty, this also really does show, as much as we've talked about Europe and we've talked about specific players, this does sort of show the dynamic of this particular talk show, Monty, because to fulfill our roles in terms of trying to provide an expansive view on League of Legends, trying to compare the regions, trying to even have some expertise in specific regions, we have to give a certain amount of time to Europe, we have to talk about Europe, but in a small digression where I just mentioned Samsung White, we then had the most animated section, which was 20 minutes of talking about why Samsung White was so good, to the extent that you forgot, we were still in Europe section here, by the way, buddy. We're still talking about, like, Unicorns of Love versus FNATIC. But anyway, back to Europe. The third place game took place, and SK lost another best of 5 series. What do you think of this?
I think that it goes back to what we were saying about everything else that happened in Europe in terms of SK during their semifinal match versus UOL, which is that, okay, we see another 2 bans aimed at Forgiven. Why the fuck can nobody else carry this team?
Like, this makes that argument that I had for Forgiven about Fox look really bad for his side. Because remember, he wasn't just saying Fox is a good player and he's like the 3rd best player on my team. He was saying Fox is a top. He said Fox is the best mid laner in Europe. How is it that the best mid laner in Europe has at most 1 ban against him in some of these games, sometimes no bans, and isn't just picking his best champion and shitting on people? I mean, if you're a real carry threat on the level that Forgiven presented Fox as there, this is your chance to shine. Here's the ball, mate. I've got all the defenders on me. Like, everyone's watching what I'm doing, playing against me.
He had 1 ban this whole series, and it was Zed in game 1. 1.
Then he should be dominating. That's on him.
Yep.
That's the thing. You can't put it all on Forgiven when he has everything against him already. Now, he had some games he didn't play great. That's obvious. I mean, his Corki play has always been a bit lacking in these playoff runs, but I think you can't distract away from Fox, though.
He did play some Lucian and some Jinx in the games that they lost, and you would expect him to do better, especially on that Lucian. But, you can't... Forgiven's going to have some bad games. I think overall he's well deserving of the MVP of the season, and even in the playoffs, I think, especially against Unicorns of Love, I thought he played just fine. But somebody else has to fucking step up. Seriously.
I mean, that's one of the problems is, like, where was Fox? Like, not really there. Svenskeren one's more difficult because Svenskeren seriously seemed like he either had really exceptional games or just games where he wasn't the player we think he is. What did you think of him overall in this series?
I think that it's very weird that Svenskeren defaults back to this Nunu at any other time, or not the Nunu, the Lee Sin at any time. And I think that it shows an issue within this team where it's like, if Forgiven gets banned out, well, then they expect Svenskeren to play on Lee Sin. And in other metas, that would be fine. We're currently in the only meta that has ever existed in competitive League of Legends that Lee Sin cannot be played as a top-tier jungler. He's just not. The tank junglers are too powerful at the given time, and we're not seeing that emphasis on champions like Sejuani. And that just says that SK is so concerned with getting that early advantage that they don't feel comfortable playing for the late game and for that scaling up, and that they feel like Svenskeren has to go in there to make the plays. And that's a huge burden for a jungler on a champion that isn't optimal in the current metagame. And I don't think it's a good way to play.
I also feel like with Svenskeren, sometimes, like, actually watching this playoffs, I'm cooling off on him a bit. Because the thing is, he was exceptional in some games, but I think he has some sort of a performance in anxiety a bit, dude. I think, like, sometimes...
It's the draft. It's the strategy of the team, I think, that is flawed with Svenskeren. And yes, when he looks good, and he looked good on Lee Sin during these playoffs, he looked great. Because it's just that Lee Sin has a narrower window right now. Because we have to talk about why this happened. So why isn't Lee Sin good in the current meta? It's because Cinderhulk is so strong. Okay, well, why were tank junglers not that viable before? Well, a lot of the reason is because they would get so low during their clear that a bruiser or a dueling jungler like Lee Sin or a Kha'Zix or whatever that we used to see, going into the enemy jungle could just one-shot them, basically, because they were so low from clearing these camps. Now that the jungle monsters in the latest patches have gone down in terms of power, now that we see items like Cinderhulk, make it so that these tank junglers can clear better, especially with Gromp buff, where it returns the damage, of course, so they have to spend less time getting hit by the jungle minions. There are a lot of factors at play that make these tank junglers generally have higher health on their first clear, right? So that means that the option to go in and kind of deal with Sejuani in the jungle is not as reliable. You can't just go in there and get have a high percentage chance of a kill. Okay, well, with that said, what happens? Now, if you don't get kills with Lee Sin in the early game, he's going to be very quickly outscaled due to the efficiency of Cinderhulk. The fact that it has this multiplicative stat on HP, so the longer the game goes, in proportion, the stronger the Cinderhulk jungler gets compared to the Lee Sin, right? Because it's the stats, the additional items that they get are being multiplied in terms of their power. So Lee Sin has a very narrow timing window to create a snowball and to win the game. Now, when Svenskeren can do that, of course, it looks extraordinary. He's a great Lee Sin player, but it's high risk. You don't want to strategically put your eggs in that basket right now because it doesn't have the highest percentage chance of success. The highest percentage chance of success is a tank jungler. That is 100% true.
Okay, but saying that, let's be specific to Svenskeren here. So Cacao, you'll still see him playing in Italy. You'll still see these champions being played. Is it better for Svenskeren to try and force that and have some crazy game when it goes off, a bit like Cacao does in LPL every now and then? Or should he be going, like, should Svenskeren be on Gragas now and Sejuani now and Nunu now?
Yes, everybody should be on those champions. He can bust out the Lee Sin if they have a specific strat for it, but picking, so many Lee Sin games right now is risky. He played 3 in the last set. And also, as to Nidalee, a bit different because you can be aggressive early, but Nidalee has a function in a late game team. If you're playing a disengage comp or a siege comp or a poke comp, Nidalee can be there and do significant damage. Lee Sin is nowhere near as good as Nidalee is in the late game.
The most disappointing thing about this series to me is that because SK was winning so many games, when they were using that one-dimensional style, because it was always winning, it wasn't wrong, and it was accurate to keep... Like, if you find something that really works, you should hammer that home. You should keep doing it every time and force people to figure out how to beat it. But it made me realize that, as bizarre as it sounds, upgrading some of the skill positions, like the upgraded mid, the upgraded AD carry, obviously, has actually taken away some of what was beautiful about SK before. Like, SK before really were like the EU Cloud9. They did win off great strategical decisions and being able to adapt to opponents.
Ooh, they were more limited because I still think last season they played in this kind of full aggro, lane aggro sort of way. I see their playstyle as actually not having changed very much.
You think it's the same style?
Yeah, pretty much.
I think their decision making was way better in the mid game than the last season.
Okay, that may be fair, but
whereas that's what I saw disappear now.
Still,
like when they do bullying,
the style
they have
of
issues.
Push the lanes, win the laning phase, get the early towers, have Svenskeren autoing turrets. It's the same.
I'm sure enough of this has leaked out into the public. It was obvious there are some sort of, I won't say problems, I'll just say frictions within SK Gaming between either players and if what they think the team should become in the future, like difference of opinion. So it really was the case that, some people would have gone as far as to say even if SK had won this split, they still might have made roster changes. I don't entirely buy that, because even when people are grumbling and they're saying like, oh, I hate playing with that person, I think if you really do win, there's a very high chance you'll just keep it together and try and at least see what happens next, But ignoring that, if they'd have come second, I would have said that it's pretty likely there'll be roster changes. Coming fourth, surely it's almost certain there's going to be roster changes in this team.
Yeah, I think that they probably have to do something at this point because they have to diversify out of this style that they have, because while it was very impressive at the beginning of the season and people didn't know how to react to it, as soon as people figured out how to ban, thank you GE Tigers, they've struggled. And they haven't had that same level of play when they can't get that really big early lane advantage and start taking your outer ring of turrets. And they have to diversify, otherwise it'll be very easy for other teams to beat them. And H2K, on the other hand, this is a team that I think has more diverse strategies. They play a lot of the meta picks. I really like the drafts that we saw, I think, from H2K over the course of this series. I don't really see very many issues with them. They just need to tighten up, I think, their in-game play a little bit. I don't even mind Lulu mid that we saw in Game 2 where they lost because they had Hecarim and top lane, so they had to carry top laner, and they had the Callista. So I think that that H2K actually is in a pretty good place at the moment. I think they're going to do quite well next season. Yeah.
So in terms of SK, one of the issues for SK, I think, is that well, just with the way I can't see how there won't be a roster change. Basically,
it seems like there will be. I don't know where you look for that. Freddie, after last season having such an impressive performance, really didn't deliver very much. And you'd think that Freddie would be able to do a lot with these Smite top laners, but that just kind of wasn't the case over the course of this series. You'd think that this Hecarim and Shyvana would be very good champions for him. But he didn't show up either. I mean, there's a lot of criticism of Fox, but Freddie was able to do incredible things last season on top lane tanks, and his play hasn't been up to standard either.
Okay, if you look at the problems SK had once people started this target banning of Forgiven, this actually shows me one of the weird differences in the West that I've noticed, which is, I've always said this. In fact, I said this to Svenskeren, I think, on my Chinese League of Legends talk show, Incoming Aggression. I said that what's always been weird to me about how people rank Western players against Korean players is that once it's known a Korean star player is a god on a certain champion, that will nearly always be banned. Like, it will very rarely be let out, and you usually only let it out if you have a specific strategy to deal with it. Like, we want him to play this, therefore we're almost going to bait him into it because we've got all these other like, for example, if someone's a great Zed player, but you're in the era when everyone was just picking Exhaust, it's like, go ahead, pick Zed, mate. Like, you want him to at that point in time, you know. But in this world where, in the Western world, I've always said, people won't like this because I'm going to essentially make a big difference between Western star players and Eastern star players. Western star players get to play their main champion way more than East Asian players do. It's insane. You get players where some of them aren't even gods. They're just really good on two champions, and they're getting one of the two champions 1 out of 2 games. It's insane to me. So as a result, they're looking phenomenal. Now, here's the thing.
Bjergsen is maybe the exception to that. He draws a lot of target bans. It
wasn't necessarily wrong initially in the season when people hadn't seen SK play to not ban everything onto Forgiven, because they were looking at, and listen, the philosophy, I think, was that people were too focused on meta bans. So they wanted to ban away specific meta champions from the mid lane or away from Svenskeren in the jungle. Therefore, Forgiven always got one of the 2 champions he wanted. Now, what we found out later was that what you have to, the philosophy difference here is the difference between banning very strong meta champions and banning very strong champions for this player. There's a difference between the philosophy there because
that shuts down their strategy.
Because you can let through a very strong meta champion if that guy isn't going to just kill you with it. And that's what we saw with SK. You could let through meta champions, they wouldn't necessarily kill you with them.
No, they wouldn't carry the games on them, and that's the big concern. It's like, we can go back to Faker and LeBlanc, and Faker's played, I don't know, maybe 150 professional games at this point, and he's 11-0 on LeBlanc. But
so he's got LeBlanc 11 times ever.
Yeah. Sometimes he doesn't pick it, of course, because LeBlanc has fluctuated in power with the meta, and he's not going to pick it if it's not good in the meta. That is true. He's not just going to pick it because he can. But I mean, the number of LeBlanc bans against Faker is extraordinarily high. I don't know the exact statistic. I'd have to that would be a hard statistic to pull. Basically, you'd have to review every single Faker game that he's ever played and take a look and see when LeBlanc was banned. But LeBlanc has been banned many times. Conservatively, I would say in at least 50% of his games.
So essentially, just to summarize that for anyone who hasn't got the point yet, sometimes the best Asian players are playing their 3rd best champion in a lot of these games,
right?
Where the Western player might be playing his best or his 2nd best, which is a distinction worth making.
You can see the big difference in the way that teams play when Faker or Easyhoon is playing. For example, LeBlanc is a very common ban these days in Korea because of the strength of the champion, but it is never banned against Easyhoon.
That's because they know that Easyhoon also follows the philosophy that Karthus wins that matchup. So why would I pick LeBlanc? It is the losing matchup. Just a little callback to the old classic argument there. So in terms of SK Gaming, though, going forwards, if you're just playing again the hypothetical speculatory GM, where would you want a move made? Which positions do you want to shore up or improve, or just outright to have to rip this out and put a new player in there?
For SK?
Yep. Because remember, it's not enough. Here's the problem with coming fourth. If SK had even lost in the final of EU, that would be an issue, and that would be a real complaint, because SK was supposed to potentially be the best Western team, ergo going beyond that, then he's going to have a chance to come, like, you know, top 8, top 4 at Worlds. Well, at the moment, they couldn't even come top 4 in Europe, so they had... that's not enough to just get a little bit better or to do a bit better and make the final. Like, it has to be win or lose, win or nothing, you know. So going for win or nothing, what would you change?
It's so hard because this is another thing where they're so stuck in their one strategy that I don't know if they were forced by their coaches or by their staff to play a very different style, what their success rate would be, because we've seen players like Freddie be... Yeah, I think Freddie was probably the best top laner in Europe last year. Or at least last summer. So, and Svenskeren we've seen be really good. I'm not sure what's going on with Fox. I don't know. I would change the coaching staff, honestly. I wouldn't change the players on that team. I still think on paper that's a good team, and that if it was mostly strategic problems that they didn't diversify enough down the stretch and teams figured it out, that caused them issues, because when they were able early in the season, I mean, they ended the season in first place. They had just a little bit of a dip in the middle, just in the best of 5 system where they couldn't actually pull out those wins.
What happens to Forgiven though? Like, if Forgiven stays in this team, isn't it a concern that Forgiven can't play Corki, that he can't just pull out a choke, he can't just pick Urgot? You can't just go in this particular route. Have we seen some limitation here that, like, he's not going to transcend? What do you think?
I think the team plays poorly with Corki as well. It's not just Forgiven. They were so reliant on pushing the lanes and taking the first turrets that they didn't know how to play when that didn't happen. So to me, that's potentially an issue with the players' knowledge and their preparation going into a match, not necessarily a knock at the skill of the players directly, I would say. Obviously, indirectly, they should have been able to realize that you have to play differently with certain champions, and they shouldn't have tunneled so hard on this one style. I don't know. I think that team with some, again, very, very similar situation, I have to say, to Unicorns of Love, with some strong coaching. And, you know, frankly, that's the thing that really is lacking in Europe, is strong team identities or strong coaching, right? I think the team that we've seen work out the best has been H2K in that regard, with showing that they have strategic diversity, showing that they do have a good grasp of the optimal way to play the game at a given time. I think H2K has been doing the best in that regard.
What did you think?
I think they're not. I think the support infrastructure for the teams in Europe is just a lot worse than NA at the given time.
What do you think of Ryu's play in the third place series?
Great.
Classic throwback Zed game. It was good. That was sick.
Great.
Dude, I can't believe there's a game where you have a big fight mid lane. You know, it's over now. Everyone just move back. We're low health targets, so let's just move further up into the mid lane. Oh, did that world famous Zed player just cane our heads in? That weird. I never could have seen that coming myself. Have you guys ever seen film? You ever watch an OGM back in the day? Were any of you playing back when that was going on? What's going on here, guys? Like, what is this series? That's worth pointing out as well, is that you can't say enough about how impressive it is that actually Ryu did end up getting fully integrated into H2K. Because remember, the joke about Koreans is that if you're going to have a Korean, you better pick up 2, because you need at least 2 who can communicate and talk and be friends and all that. Ryu's on his own. He doesn't have anyone with him there. He's on a team with fully like European players, people who have nothing to do and he's not one of those Koreans who has like baller ass English and actually can bust it out, or just doesn't speak much on camera but is really fluent. He doesn't really have like great English. So I'm just impressed he could become that seamless almost within the team.
Right, and even if you look at the team while they're in game and you watch the player cams, he's actually talking a lot too. So he's very active, it seems, even if his English isn't that good, at least at the basics in terms of getting the necessary information down to his teammates. And I agree. Props to him for his resilience in this, in adapting to Europe. And there was that question too, because remember at IEM in Cologne, we were looking at him playing, and he didn't really look like he was on the same page as Roccat when he was subbing in for them. The coordination just wasn't there, but that synergy really has grown for H2K over the course of the season. They had a bit of a rocky start, but I think they finished pretty strong, and that's a team that I think is just going to keep getting better.
Okay, here's a bold question for you. When you look at teams like FNATIC, Unicorns of Love, H2K, we'll leave SK out of it at the moment because they just look so bad. Where would these stack up in NA? Because, okay, like, for example, I know before you thought TSM and TIP were the two strongest teams in NA. Where would a team like H2K or FNATIC stack up against TSM and TIP? Like, I think you've cooled off TIP now. I think you've cooled right the fuck off there.
I mean, it's just that they keep playing Rush as Nunu. I don't know what their decision making is on that. It's just weird. And that's exactly the opposite thing that I'll say with Svenskeren, because Svenskeren doesn't have to be the carry on that team that we've noticed. And there is an element of risk, of course, but Rush is also... that's the only way that Team Impulse has been able to really snowball those games. But anyway.
Okay. Okay, are you aware that there's not a microphone inside that mug there, Monte? Like, I don't have to teach you about how production works here, but for the mic to hear you, you can't be covering your mouth. There's a little pro tip for you. As you go on in this industry, you'll pick up these things, Monte.
I think H2K would do very well in NA. I think they have the level of strategy to be very competitive against the top NA teams, and they have some solid individual playmakers as well on that team, and they have, I think, a very good pick band right now. So I think H2K would do fine. FNATIC would probably be able to brute force some people.
Would FNATIC beat Cloud9 in a best of 5?
I think so, just based on individual skill. I really think that TSM is just way better than anybody else in NA at the current time. I think there's just a very large gap right there. So okay. I think FNATIC, just purely based on individual skill, if we look at the talent of players like Huni and Forbidden, I think they would just wreck people in NA.
So we'll go on to NA as a region later on. So let's just for now do the European part of it. FNATIC is going to be at MSI, and you've got a whole bunch of players who have no international experience. I mean, remember, they were rookies even to LCS, 4 out of the 5. They're going to go to this tournament that in theory is going to...
Reignover had a lot of experience, so it's not...
Exactly. When you say international experience.
Yeah, international experience, yes.
Yeah, he just played Koreans and he is a Korean, Monte. So technically, in a way, sort of right, but not at the same time, okay? That's literally domestic experience. But okay, so they're going to go to this tournament and they're going to have to play the best Chinese team, the best Korean team, TSM. See, I did that as a joke there, Monte. No, the best NA team and the wildcard team at TSM. No, the real wildcard team. So they're going to play against these teams. Oh yeah. And AHQ. My bad. Sorry, all the hipsters out there. I always said AHQ is my pick to come top 2. Whatever. So they're going to play all these teams. How do you think FNATIC will fare?
I think they'll do okay in the best of 1 format. I think that they can take a game off of TSM. I don't think they'll be. They may make 1 game against the Chinese and Korean teams close. But I think that if they make top 4, they'll squeak in 3rd or 4th place and then get rocked in a best of 5.
Could AHQ beat them?
I have not seen the LMS playoff games yet. I need to go back and review those, so I have an opinion yet.
Are those beneath you also?
No, I want to go back and watch them before MSI to get a sense of the team. I need to do that. I just haven't done it yet.
You're not just disgusted by the lack of Koreans that they have, I mean, they don't have any Koreans almost in their league, Monte, They don't, at least FNATIC has some Koreans, that tempted you, but then you were like, Koreans? Reignover. No, I've got better things to do. To be honest, mate, there's a movie on, Game of Thrones is on, Okay. So, does it make you, speaking of Ryu and him integrating, does it make you question something about OGN and the nature of that league and the way they recruit talent, that somehow Reignover keeps getting away with it? Somehow he still hasn't been exposed as the shit player that we know he must be. I don't know what he did. I don't know if if he killed someone who was a better player and absorbed his soul. I don't know if he maybe he actually went into some sort of commune and had his entire personality broken down, so he no longer exists anymore, and he just became an enlightened being. Maybe that's how he overcame being Reignover every day of his life. I don't know what he did, but how is it possible Reignover's getting away with this, Monte? How?
I don't know, and also still picking Olaf, even when it's just absolutely terrible right now. I am quite surprised at Reignover. He at least has some really good synergy with Huni. I'm intrigued to see how well he does against some more top-tier junglers, because right now, at least in Europe, he doesn't have a lot of competition. I think in terms of junglers who are not just mechanically good, but know where to be on the map and win. So that'll be interesting if it is like Clear Love and that goes, and Lee or Bengi/Tom who go to MSI to see how he does under those circumstances.
Are you ready for the BM, Monte? Are you ready for the salt where people get mad?
Oh boy. It
could work out in the favor of people like Reignover. You know why? Because we're going to have an MSI where you would think in the history of League of Legends, Monte, that's a scary prospect if you're not like an uber god jungler, because you might have to face Dandy, Kakat, well, maybe not Kakat, he wouldn't have ever been a one, you know what I mean? Bengi when he was good. Like, you might have to play Loveling, you might have to play against Clearlove, whoever. You might have to play against players, Meteos, players who are like clear-cut the best in their region or one of the best. But this might be an MSI, Monte. This is a real possibility.
Where TBQ...
Are you ready? Schwen, TBQ, Bengi, or Lee. Dude, I'll take either of those. Santorin might be the best juggler at the fucking tournament. The AHQ guy, who gives a fuck? Like, this ain't exactly the maddest talent you're ever going to meet there, mate.
That's true.
In fact, the worst thing is, I'm almost hoping EDG doesn't go, just so that whole Clearlove debate, well, I say Clearlove debate, intervention that we repeatedly have with all the China Talk people, if Clearlove gets to go and just style on all these fools, like, I don't know if I'll be able to handle it, dude. Like, and be like, look, he dominated an international competition. Like, that was Lee! What are you talking about? It's nothing!
You know what's funny is actually if CJ wins, Ambition might actually be the best jungler there.
That would be glorious. That would be glorious, wouldn't it? Dude, did you see in that trash talk segment of Jinner and CJ where essentially all that happened was, you know, when like Ganked by Mom was talking about Ambition, and like Ambition was just like talking shit on him, and then Ganked by Mom just kept saying to everyone, like, you don't like me, do you? And then they were all like, no, I don't actually, Ganked by Mom. I actually hate you. Like, that's like what all the trash talk was like. That was so bizarre. And you know what? My favourite line, Monte, because it was brilliant. It shows that my theory's correct, by the way. Why Ambition got away with that shit for years on Blaze, where he was like not living up to his carry potential and they never removed him, is because I can tell he had some sort of status where other players in the team were afraid to question him. It's like in MMA, okay? Sure. In MMA, you can have a really good fighter, but who maybe isn't that good at taking a punch, because he doesn't allow people in the gym to ever like hit him really hard, you know. They have to go easy on him, and so he never learns to take a punch. I get the sense that's what happened with Ambition, because in that trash talk segment, there was a section where they asked Ganked by Mom, who used to play in Frost, remember, what he thought of Ambition as a jungler, and he said, oh, I think he's the same as a jungler as he is as a mid. And all Ambition said was like, what does he mean by that? Like, even Ambition knew that has to be a diss. That can't possibly be a compliment. So that's like, he was just like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, he didn't even say like, that's not true, or like, he knew the implication that was underlying that.
Thank you. I was a great mid later.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, thank you. I'm good at both positions. You're correct. I'm one of the best in my region, and my team's now going top 4. Instead, even he knew. Like, wait a minute. Are you suggesting I'm as shit at mid as I was at I mean, I know I'm a good. Like, you know, even he knew there was something under that.
By the way, this goes back to the trash talking thing in Western fans. Can you imagine if there was this level of trash talk before a playoff game in LCS? It would be awesome, but the Western fans can't handle it. They would go, the level of tilt from the fan base would be so insanely high because people can't take a fucking joke.
Like, dude, if Santorin or something was like, you know, I know you guys are having problems. I mean, they could never. The joke I'm thinking of now, Monte, I just realized they could obviously never say on a broadcast, even on OGN. But my joke was going to be, I know you guys are having difficulty getting high in the game, but don't worry, Meteos. This is what Santorin would say. 420 is not that far after the finals. That would be the joke there, Monte. That's it. That would be the delivery on that. It has so many levels to it. Well, it actually has one level, but you know what I mean. Like, that would be the smack talk right there. But I want real smack talk. I want people talking shit about each other, because the whole point is it's allowed in that context, because they know this is the trash talk segment, you know. And it allows you to say the thing, crucially, like in those segment, that is really the true thing, but you never normally can say out of politeness. Like, the whole point is, you literally would say, if you were TSM, something like, you know, we really look forward to seeing the Hive versus Bjergsen match. You know, it'd be that sort of trash talk, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it'd be great. And that's the thing about some more conservative cultures like Koreans, when the humility is expected of you to a way more insane degree on a day-to-day basis, because in Korean culture, you know, when you go out drinking with somebody, like, all bets are off. You can say whatever the hell you want, and it's the implication that outside of that specific cultural time, that none of it matters. Like, if you go, in terms of Korean drink culture, if you go out with your company, you have a lot more freedom in terms of what you can say. Like, the social structure loosens up in a way, but it's understood that it never goes outside of the drinking time, right? And that you're not going to refer to it later on. And I feel it's the same way with these trash talk segments, where you see all these boring interviews a lot of the time, where the Korean players are like, I would like to thank my team and my coach, and the other team played really well, and you know, I think we got lucky, and blah 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 blah. But there's this specific time that has been designated as trash talk time, where everyone understands that all the other rules go away.
So to close up the European topic, the storyline with Europe was that you needed SK to win, and they needed to win dominantly, so that at least with all the other problems and all the new teams and all the new players, you could at least say, right, here's a team that is really strong, and even if Europe has issues, they have one really dominant team. Instead, what you've ended up with is SK is losing these best of fives in fifth games, and then even FNATIC is like narrowly getting past HGK, and then is narrowly beating Unicorns of Love. So does this mean Europe as a region? Is there an issue there in Europe as a region?
I think there is, in terms of just consistency. I think that teams really they're either one-dimensional, in the case of SK, at least in a best of five, where they don't have people who can pick up the slack, or they're just insanely inconsistent in their decision-making. I legitimately thought FNATIC would 3-0 Unicorns of Love. That's what I thought we would see. I thought they would discover a kind of play in a more consistent fashion, but they didn't. Their decision-making was still too high risk. And while that can win you games at times, because sometimes you'll make the high-risk play and you'll get the reward from it, and you won't be punished, and then you can snowball off of that. And that, I think FNATIC will be able to pick up, you know, a decent number of wins, maybe squeak into the semifinals in the bottom half. I just don't see them coming out against either a Chinese or a Korean team in a best of five. That would be very surprising.
Based on what you said about TSM, and we'll talk about NA in the next segment, if we remove TSM, is there parity between NA and EU?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I think there is. I think, in fact, some of the EU teams may actually be stronger, like H2K. I think there's a vast gulf between TSM and the rest of NA.
Right, I've got a nice big glass of water here to go along with the impending salt that comes from this particular segment of the show as we head over the Atlantic, or the Pacific in your case, to your home, at least technically your home, like you were born there and you were to some degree raised there. But, you know, part of being at home is like you have to be accepted by the people there, and you actually have to love the place that you're from. You know, they say home is where the heart is, Monty. And I sometimes question if your heart, if indeed that alleged organ does exist within your body, if that heart did exist, does it really reside in North America? I'm not always so sure, you know. I think this, we could go back and forth on that to some degree, but in theory your heart used to reside in North America. Like, you didn't leave your heart in wherever that place was, Tennessee or whatever. I don't know what that song title is. You left your heart in Seoul at like the top floor of the iPark Mall, right? That was your version. That's catchy, but yeah.
The OGN studio. Yeah, I enjoy this. You know, I enjoy talking about NA and EU LCS, because no matter what I say, I just get pilloried for it. Yeah, I don't get any props for predicting winners accurately. Just shit on every time I don't predict, even though I'm out there predicting everything. Put myself on the line day in, day out as an analyst, trying to explain my philosophy, trying to make some logical arguments here and there. Nope, it's just throw tomatoes at Monte.
See, for having the audacity, the temerity to dare to suggest that you could analyze a game and suggest who played better, who made mistakes. I think that you should just really take a leaf out of the Riotcasters book. You should be a little more humble. You should do less content. You should just tell everyone how wonderful both teams are. You should say that maybe someone who lands a thresh hook might be just, hey, maybe just as a fun thing, maybe they're just the best thresh player of all time. Who knows? Who can say? Wouldn't it be great if they were, though? That would be, whoa, gosh, what a world. The imagination.
That's what I've learned from these from these playoffs, Thorin, is that in making predictions and being on shows and trying to break down the teams, is that I really can't. In fact, there is no objective basis for analysis in League of Legends. There is absolutely no way, without teams playing each other, to know who is better, because we can't tell from slow analysis of the game, from looking at picks and bans, from looking at how teams develop their strategy, from how individual players play, how they work together as a team. We can't possibly know who is better.
The problem is, when you're saying this to me, Monte, it reminds me of a comment I saw in that thread, which was upvoted, I believe, by the way, where the comment began, and the way it was phrased, by the way, it's obvious this isn't, like, English isn't this person's native language, but it just began, he is blinded by his insight. And I just thought, like, that is one of the most hilarious criticisms of an analyst I think I've ever seen. Like that's just unbelievable. That's like, I can't even. I almost cried laughing when I read that.
The show to Blinded by Insight, our new title.
That would be a better name for it, wouldn't it? So you should stop being biased Monte and blinded by insight. And you know what you should do if you're being blinded by the overwhelming light of insight, Monte? Put on some rose-tinted NA sunglasses that will provide you with both the UV protection of not being overwhelmed by the superior light that comes from Korean play, but also allow you to look cool and be accepted by the population in the West, because that is a trope from the 1980s. Okay, so the other thing is, Monte, even though I like the way we always say there's salt coming. Yeah, we don't say that we don't start it for the first 15 minutes where we get salty about the fact that people get salty. Okay, saltception, that's what's going on here. But with that said, even though Monte bemoans it now, there is another perspective you have to realize, Monte, which is that, yes, everyone's shitting on you, no matter which angle, no matter which way. But first of all, we have to once more give credit to the man I think of in many ways as the greatest philosopher of the League of Legends era. No, not Xpecial. He's up there, but he's more of a niche pick, The problem is no one watches his vlogs, so we can't ever really. He's like that knowledge that's unknown, but do we actually know it? And is it possible to know it? Well, if Xpecial makes a vlog and no one actually watches it, then was it still boring? Probably. Anyway, so it wasn't Xpecial. The greatest philosopher and thinker of our time is a man called Reginald, who's the leader of TSM, because he issued the famous statement, which I've now paraphrased into famous haters make me famous. But his famous legendary line was, haters make me famous. So in this sense, Monte, I think it's actually a good thing that everyone can agree that no matter what you say, you are wrong, that they're going to watch your content to explain why you're utterly wrong, and you are definitely wrong. And even no matter what the details are, you are definitely wrong. So as long as everyone's doing that, you are very famous at being wrong and disrespected. You
know what's funny about that is I was watching the YouTube analytics of Summoning Insight after TSM beat Team Impulse, and damn, did we get a lot of views on that previous episode like a week later.
Yeah, people linking to spots in it. Hey, listen, I love that. I love it when people are like, hey, and you know what? At this minute, they were totally wrong. And everyone's like, really? Let me have a look at that. I'll show them. And like, yeah, keep clicking, boys. Keep clicking. If anything, guys, I'd love you guys to really investigate how wrong we are. Find some older examples of it. Maybe. Now, listen, I'm not that bothered if you find any examples in the On Gamers episodes. Personally, that's neither here nor there. Don't get petty. Don't go too far. But in the recent memory, sort of since it's been on the Inside Esports channel, please do look into it. Yeah, please do be concise and investigative in your journalism there. So, and it is journalism, by the way, making random Reddit comments that show no basis or understanding of the tenets of journalism. But that's where the experts of journalism come from, Reddit. So, speaking of which, we'll go now into NA. So let's just start with the final. not really a very competitive final. Why wasn't it more competitive, Monte? I mean, I actually kind of said this, that I saw the only way Cloud9 could win games. It was going to take that, like, great play from behind, ability to make amazing decisions and get back in. Why didn't any of that even happen in this game?
I think that Cloud9's pick and ban phase. I reviewed this on stream, and if we talk about the picks here, I really think TSM did a good job of selecting a variety of diverse and effective team compositions throughout this series. But if we look at what C9 was doing in terms of running double AD compositions or trying to run Vlad and Zed as like a 1-3-1 split push, it's not that they can't win in the current meta in terms of double AD or 1-3-1 split pushing. It's that the timing windows are much smaller, and that the way that the turrets are right now, especially in splitting, you're not going to be able to take an inhibitor just by split pushing unless the other team makes a huge error. Which actually we saw in this game, hilariously enough, when Sneaky just like runs down the mid lane and takes the turret. And we still see those elements of Cloud9's shot calling. I just feel that in a couple of these games, they back themselves into a corner in picks and bans, or playing mid Lulu with top Scion, where Sneaky was the only damage threat. And we saw SK Telecom run a very similar speed pick composition with mid Lulu, Faker on mid Lulu, and Bang carrying the game on Sivir. But in all of these compositions, I think that we can look. They are either narrow in terms of their timing window, such as the double AD composition before the team builds enough armor and gets super tanky in the current meta with a couple Frozen Hearts, or they're limited in the way that you can play them strategically. With the mid Lulu and the Sivir game, you have to create picks. And in a meta that is dominated by 5v5 team fighting, you're basically banking on the fact that you can engage in a 5v4 or pick somebody off before the team can group. And for SK Telecom, that did work against the GE Tigers. GE was very slow in grouping in that game, and they were able to use Whimsy and On the Hunt to pick people off very efficiently with Bang and then snowball that to a win. Or the 1-3-1, where you pretty much have to have an advantage, because with Zed right now, if you don't get ahead early on, and you try and 5v5 even in gold with like Zed Vlad as a 1-3-1 split push, you're probably not going to win against the level of crowd control that the other team has, and especially once they start getting QSS or other items to make sure that Zed can't kill anybody, or if they just get too tanky for Zed to kill too. That's another option. So you kind of have to have a big gold lead, and you get that from split pushing, but TSM did a really good job of trading evenly with objectives with Cloud9. So I think the TSM picked compositions that were more versatile strategically, and a lot of C9's comps, and in fact we've gone over all the games they lost, were either narrow timing windows or narrow use in terms of how they could be played in the game.
What was interesting was that same dynamic played out yet again in TSM's thing. You know, there's some stat, like the last time TSM won game 1 of a best of 3 or best of 5 series was something like 2013 in like the semi-final against Vulcan or something. Well, they were XDG, they were Vulcan at the time in the semi. That was like the last time they won game 1 of one of those series. Because even in the ones they're winning, it still repeats now. They always lose game 1, then come back strong in the game 2, you know, going on like that. And what's interesting is it feels like that's even more pronounced with this team. It's like if you beat them in game 1, but it's close or like a narrow decision, you're fucked at that point, because that was your best chance, and then they'll make adaptations, and if anything, you probably won't play to that level, and you're done at that point. You know, it does seem to be a strange pattern that still plays out there.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting to consider them going into MSI as well, because especially in the best of 1, when they're doing the double round robin, we could see TSM drop games to teams like FNATIC or maybe AHQ under those scenarios, teams that they would be very unlikely, I feel, to lose against in a best of 5. But they have to be very careful, I believe, at MSI, because if the first time they meet a team, they're going to have some of these issues, they may end up, it's possible that they end up in the 4th seed and up against the 1st seed in the semifinals. So I think this is a weakness that may hurt them at MSI.
That is also where the format could help them, though, because that, interestingly, that means in the playoffs they could be playing a team they already played in a best of 1 before, but which obviously doesn't count towards the best of 5. So
yeah, but that team is probably a Korean or Chinese team, and they're going to have a really difficult time winning a best of 5 against the number 1 or number Korean or number 1 Chinese team.
In terms of Cloud9, let's talk about some of the players. Do you think Balls is just MIA forever? What happened to that guy? He used to be beautiful.
I don't know what's going on with Balls this season. We saw Meteos pay a lot of attention to the top side of the map in this series, trying to help him out, get him ahead. But a lot of it was TSM executing some really, really good lane swaps. And for me, especially Game 3 was the highlight match for TSM of this series, because Lustboy and Santorin worked together extremely well to make sure that Dyrus got a big advantage in the lane swap. And their tactical play in the early game, where if you watch that game, take a look at how Lustboy recalls, where he is on the map compared to Santorin, so that they're not able to really be dove, and it's very precise play, and TSM is impressive in that way.
When it comes to getting the winning end of the lane swaps, like getting the ones you want, avoiding the ones you don't, how much of that is like a coaching staff win? Like they prepared them correctly, they told them like this is what might happen. How much is like shot calling within the moment and figuring out what's happening?
I think that what was weird about this series is both TSM and Cloud9 had almost identically the same ideas of how to play the level 1. We saw the reverse like support invades on the junglers and where the junglers and the top laners were starting, and like the support harassment from both sides. I think a lot of that is just coaches and analysts setting up an early game for them. But when you have those mirrored instances, except for the most part, TSM played the lane swaps better. And what was also strange about this series is I thought Cloud9 would want to be in the 1v1 and the 2v2, but instead there was lane swaps every single game. So I guess I'm a bit disappointed that Cloud9 wasn't more insistent on trying to get some of these 2v2 matchups, because I feel that TSM masks Wild Turtle's pretty poor laning phase by doing that, and that's a good way to get an advantage on TSM. That said, Cloud9 also left up Kalista and Kennen, and these are picks that would be highly prized by a Korean team. First picking Kalista is not at all uncommon, and Kalista's banned in most games. But Kalista Kennen is one of the most powerful dual lanes in the game right now, not only for picking up kills in the laning phase, but for insane team fighting in the late game. So I don't think they're going to be quite so lucky. I think Cloud9's weird champion pools affected them in this series.
Well, that's the thing is that's the new OP team fight mechanic. You throw the Kennen into them with the Fates called, therefore he can do the ult onto everyone, which is that's the dream if you're a Kennen player.
Right. Yeah, it's really, really strong.
So, in terms of the other Cloud9 players, everyone was obviously bagging on High before the series. Like, there's no way he can stand up to Bjergsen. He's going to be like the weak point. All the rest of it. How did you think he actually managed overall? Like, what were his issues in terms of champion pool and stuff? Was there anything different you saw in this series?
I think the fact that he can't play LeBlanc really hurts the team, because he doesn't have that threat, and LeBlanc wasn't banned or picked in this series, which is really weird given the current meta, that no one wanted to play it out. And I also am surprised that he didn't play mid Vladimir in Game 4. I would think that mid Vladimir would be a very safe pick for High, and that Balls could be going on something else throughout this series. But yeah, I think that the players that really stood out, Balls I think underperformed. High was okay, but his champion pool isn't ideal. Meteos was great on Sejuani, but kind of lackluster on other champions. And Sneaky, I think, was the only player who I feel really consistently showed up.
Shouldn't this be a good meta for Meteos, though? I mean, he came into the league as the Zac super tank farm up jungler with farming. Everyone knows how much you can fucking farm now with some of these items. This should be his back in his heyday, you know. So what did you think?
I don't think his Gragas ults were as good as Santorin's. I think Santorin's definitely the better Gragas player, and I think Meteos was definitely the better Sejuani player, but that Cloud9 prioritized taking away the Gragas from Santorin rather than playing to their own strengths.
Who do you think were the standout performers for TSM?
Lustboy and Bjergsen. Bjergsen's game on mid cog in particular, his positioning was very impressive in Game 2.
With all these problems, Monte, in Europe we have all these, we have this vying for power over who the best mid laners are. In Korea, well, Kuro got shown up at the IEM. You know, Faker's still there. Jin Air aren't even still on in the playoffs. You know, we know Najin they've got rid of Goong. Real serious question, Monte. Are you ready? Where does Bjergsen stack up in the world for mid laners now?
Ooh.
Must be top 10 at least. So.
Oh yeah, definitely top 10.
So is he top 5 though? Is he fifth best? What do you
He's
think?
probably looking in just on the outside of top 5, maybe at 6 or 7, because we have to consider there's players like, of course, Faker, Pawn. I mean, Cool didn't have a good playoff run.
But historically a very good player and good player in the split, etc.
Yeah, historically a very good player. Rookie didn't have a great playoff run either, but he's definitely top 10 material. GBM is definitely top 10 material. He put up really good numbers this season, especially statistically, in terms of, and his champion pool is very broad. Wayless is quite good.
Where would Bjergsen sit amongst these, though?
Also, then we have to talk about certain European players, too, that may be top 10 at the given time, possibly FNATIC, but I think Bjergsen is better.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe
he's definitely shown more. We've seen
maybe
more.
5 to 6, I think, or 5 to 7 would probably be reasonable.
Okay.
He's definitely very good. Unquestionably top 10, probably
the big
just
problem,
outside
obviously, with the names that we're listing is that some of these names have to play against ridiculous talent all the time to do the things that are making us rank them highly, whereas that's one area, unfortunately, where you have to look at Bjergsen and be like, we still haven't seen that yet. Like, remember, even at IEM, Bjergsen beat up Coco and Yoey Flashwolf's mid laner.
Coco deserves some. I mean, Coco's a streaky player. When Coco's good, he's really good. When
Bjergsen's wins were against the Xie guy, the Yoey Flashwolves guy.
He also sort of got bodied in lane one of those games by Xie. Game one of the finals.
Certainly. So yeah, I think the thing with Bjergsen is I'd put it like this: if people want, because of his domestic success, to say like Bjergsen should be like if I made my top 20 list again, like he should be in there like top 20 of all time. Here's the thing: Bjergsen definitely should not, because look at the names I excluded, like Macnoon, etc. aren't even on there. Then look at names like Special isn't even on there. Then look at names that are at the bottom of the list. 20th on my list is Expeke. Now let's not get crazy here, guys. Bjergsen hasn't done the shit internationally and even domestically that Expeke's done. Like, if I'm being realistic about Bjergsen, here's how I see Bjergsen. Okay, the first split he got to NA, he was dominant the first half of it, but then actually, when he came back after the trip to Denmark, he was just okay. He had some good games, but he wasn't a dominant force again for the rest of that split. They lost to Cloud9. Okay, so he's got half a regular split there. Now we go to the summer split. He actually had some issues early on, as TSM did. Then in the playoffs, he had a super sick playoff run, definitely. So we've got a super sick playoff run and half of a regular split. Let's just say he's got a whole split's worth of dominance there. Now you go into the spring split of this season. Okay, great season. Really good regular split. Really nice playoff run. So at the moment, we've got essentially 2 splits worth of domestic dominance. Winning an IEM where, again, he didn't dumpster like a bunch of elite level mids. He just played some good players. And the IEM San Jose was pretty embarrassing. So add it all together, and he's not close to godlike level yet.
That was also one of probably the most bizarre international tournament that we've ever had in terms of crazy upsets and everything like that, too.
But my point is, if you look at Bjergsen's credentials, yes, here's the way I'd describe it. If I was going to make a list, like, my top 20, let's say I made a list, Monty, that was called, like, the next 10. And the idea would be it'd be active players that have a chance to get onto that top 20 list one day. He'd be on there for sure. He'd be on there with some of these names we've mentioned already. Like Pawn would be on there. Remember, Pawn wasn't in my top 20, so Pawn would be on there with him. There'd be names on there that are in the UZI that have potential to get into that top 20. But I'd put it like this: I think Bjergsen's like halfway there. He's still got another half to go, which is he has to keep up domestic dominance, and he has to now get some big domestic wins, like as in international victories, as in not necessarily victory in the tournament, but like he has to play some big players and best them or outperform them in the tournament.
Yes.
That's what he has to add.
Yeah, and it's true that his international success at Worlds this past year, TSM got placed into what was definitely the weakest group at Worlds. Got out, but then he was getting solo killed by Pawn. Yeah,
that's the other thing. I didn't mention Worlds. So to add in Worlds, okay, he had a good Worlds. It wasn't exceptional, though. And remember, the games he got Zed and Champions of Theories he's supposed to body on, actually, those are the games he didn't really do anything. So, again, internationally, there's still some questions to be asked. Now, someone might ask, that's a bit biased, isn't it? You put Name in there and he had no international. Yeah, that's because Name's domestic results are in China versus some of the best players of all time. Also, now, if Bjergsen was dumpstering Uber Gods in NA, I'd have no problem saying it now.
But really, he doesn't have any mid competition in that NA. That's just straight up true. The mids in NA are not very good.
I mean, let's put it this way: his main competition is like Xiao Wei Xiao. Well, who the fuck's asking for Xiao Wei Xiao to be on my top 20 list? No one. It's not. Probably wouldn't even be on a top 20 Chinese player list. Like, come on, man, let's get real.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And also, the other thing about China and Name too is that Name actually still to this date has more domestic success in China than Bjergsen has in NA.
Significantly
he's
more.
won more seasons. That's it.
Yeah, significantly more. Okay. In terms of the rest of that final, okay, evaluate this. Who actually did give TSM the closer run? Cloud9 or Tip?
I'd say Impulse, actually. I think Impulse had better drafts at the very least, and I think that the top lane disparity kind of showed up in those series because Impact played very well, generally speaking, in that series. So I thought that Impulse versus TSM was overall a closer series.
If there wasn't a third place game, Monte, I would have asked you, oh, does that mean Tip's actually the second best team? And then they just had the wrong side of the bracket.
I just think they had a good matchup versus TSM, that's it.
But they lost the third place game, much like SK. So what does that mean in terms of Impulse? Like, did your expectations, were they overshot? Like they weren't actually as good as the team was capable of being?
Yeah, I think too that Rush is it's not even the fact that Rush is playing Nunu, it's that his like flash auto style of playing Nunu, like he just plays Nunu like he would Lee Sin. It's crazy to watch. It's not good. So I don't think there was good adaptation to the meta in terms of play style from Rush. Now we did see Rush play a bunch of different style of champions during this series, like a lot more Gragas, obviously. So we didn't see that same emphasis onto Nunu that we saw before. But I don't know. Impulse, I think that I'm not really a big fan of their duo lane in particular. And Xiao Wei Xiao sometimes, I mean, I just need this guy to stop playing fucking Yasuo, dude. I can't handle it anymore. I don't understand their draft a lot of the time, and the fact that these players continue to go back to pocket picks that aren't meta, whether that's Leona or Leona hasn't come back in a while, but the Leona or the Yasuo is just weird.
Well, I mean, Unicorn's a love picky, Leona, so you can do what you want, Monty. You can do whatever you want. That's the style. What do you think of? Okay, what is your conclusions from seeing TL win that series? Do you have any takeaways from it?
No more Vayne, please. That's the other thing that TL does is they still.
Hey, remember when Forgiven picked Vayne?
Vayne and Twitch. It's like,
yeah, it's good. I liked it.
Stop
Forgiven Vayne. He was like, fuck it. That was like the ultimate tilt movie. He was like, fuck it, picking Vayne, don't care, fuck you. That's not even meta, son. Like, don't care. I won't even be. Listen, this is you got your last 2 games playing with me. Fuck you. I'm playing what I want.
Just like Liquid lost 2 games playing Vayne in this series. I just don't get it.
Yeah. You could say that I'd make a lame joke, like a freak type joke. They're like, oh, they ignored the meta in vain. Except the difference is, I'd have made up that shit joke. It wasn't like written by a scriptwriter and then put onto a teleprompter, and then I read it with perfect pitch at the timing of when everyone left the opening for me. Sorry, did I pull back the curtain there? Did I reveal the mechanisms of how this shit show gets on the road, Monty? My mistake. That was all a joke, by the way. That whole segment there was a joke. Like, that was I was pushing the boundaries of comedy in esports, much like Freak. Actually, he just pushes the boundaries of comedy in life. Is it even comedy? Existential comedy with Freak. Okay, that's a new segment that I'm going to start along with the Chat Dilemma.
Oh, God.
Which I'll never allow to
don't.
die. I don't have one for the sequel, but I will. It will never die. It will always remain forever.
Yeah, great. Just like you will be forever an asshole. These 2 things are connected.
Well, I mean, look at my company. When in Rome, Monty. When in Rome. So, Team Liquid. What is your overall conclusion of Piglet? Because we've seen quite a lot of games now. We saw the CLG series, the C9 series, and now the TIP series. What is the overall view? I mean, he's obviously not going to body every game. So, how are you weighing him up overall?
I don't understand Team Liquid. They need to commit to a style, and whether that's sometimes the style of all in on Piglet has been successful, but Other times they try and move away from that style and have him play more supportive champions like Sivir, and I just feel like Team Liquid they just don't have an identity. They haven't figured out who the fuck they are as a team.
When I say this comment, Monty, I don't want people to like overreact. That's another one of these things that I don't even know why did I even just say that disclaimer right now on this show as who I am as a person. Like, that's a waste of my own breath right there. So ignore that. I'll just delete that. I do want you to overreact. It's summoning insight. Make us more famous, motherfuckers. Link to this part. Get outraged. Don't listen to the sentence afterwards. Here's my statement, okay? I actually didn't really like it that Team Liquid and people in general seemed to be all jazzed up that Team Liquid won the third place game and finished third. Like, listen, I'm not a party pooper where I'm like, after the game, even though they won, it should be like some like Bushido martial code where they should still be like slapped in the face by like the owner, Liquid 112, like, you have disgusted and disgraced me. You won this game, but next season you must do much better. Like, I don't want it to go that far. You're allowed to have like Korean barbecue if you win the game or whatever. I'm not going so hardcore. I'm like, the barbecue's for closers. You finished third. Come back and you don't. You know what? But you know what third prize is? You keep your job.
Alec Baldwin. Yeah. The barbecue is for closers.
Third prize, you keep your job. See you next season. Like, I'm not going to go that far, Monty. I'm allowing them to enjoy life. But what I'm saying is, this idea that like, oh, you finished third, that's an improvement on fourth, and things are looking up, and like, oh, better luck next season. In a weird way, I actually think that summarizes the problems with the West in League of Legends and esports, Monty. Do you remember when Blaze lost that final to MVP Ozone? As if we could ever not remember it. I mean, I've referenced it about fucking 17 times on the 40 episodes of this show we've even had. But anyway, you know the way I talk about it, Monty, as though it was like, as though I was like a member of like the inner circle of the Kennedys when JFK was shot. I'm like, no, actually, fuck JFK. Let's go Bobby Kennedy. Like, you know, he was going to be the light, Monty. He was the chance. And on that day, America's hope died. Like, I remember it like it was yesterday. That's the way I talk about that OGN final. Like, that was the moment when everything should have, and it all just went to shit. And I've been my whole esports career since then has been an elongated perform of self-psychiatry to get through the PTSD of that moment and what it's wrought upon me. But anyway, the point I'm getting to here is when they lost that final, when they lost that final, they didn't think, right, well, you know what, we lost, but we did have a great season and things went well, and you know what, we made the finals this time and we'll probably win next season. You remember the look on all their faces. You remember the way they reacted as an organization. It was like, this is the worst scenario that can happen. We didn't win. Like, winning was the only real goal. It had to happen. We didn't do it. We had a chance to win and we didn't. That's like the ultimate sin within that sort of a culture. In Team Liquid's case, it's like, yay, we finished third. That's not even the final. You didn't even lose in the final. Like, if I was Cloud9, I wouldn't be fucking happy with that finals performance. You didn't even make the final. You almost beat Cloud9, who weren't very good in the final, but then choked it away completely and now narrowly won the third place game, which who gives a fuck about? It's the third place game. But no one can win anymore. Exactly. Well, while they're going to Hawaii, hopefully they can go and look in the Bermuda Triangle and see if they can find a little bit of like competitive drive there, the flame to win, the spirit to become competitors, to settle for nothing less than the best. Gillette, not the best a man can get, Monty. Gillette. Except no substitute. I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just like doing plugs for sponsors and shit. Okay. So, Colt 45, Monty. The refreshing taste of Colt. See, if,
like that I
that was good. That was gangster, that video. That was good.
I know, it's so good, wasn't it?
That made me want to drink Colt 45. Yeah.
It works every time.
Well, I mean, that's also something you can no longer say in advertising because you will be sued. Like, you can't make statements like that. Like, that's begging for a lawsuit, that statement there, but it works every time. Like, oh well, no problem then. Also, when you say it works, you literally mean an attractive African American woman comes to the door. Like, I don't know what, like, you know when it has to say like when you buy a console, like games not included, there should have to be some text on the bottom of the screen as he's saying that. They're like, this will definitely not work every time. You know, it's got to be some context for fucking. Where's the nuance in this?
It's so funny. Holy shit.
Okay, so going forwards, if you're Liquid, do you make any roster changes? Do you stay with the same team? What do you think? Do you gamble on a young toucan to come? I'm going to push that because obviously, why the fuck would you? Like, okay. Do you think they have any problem positions?
No, this is another time. I'm going to say it again. I look at the players individually and I don't see an issue. I see an issue with the team not having an identity and them playing quass on 1 million champions over the course of the season. And they don't have any, they have very low amounts of synergy with each other. If I think about it, I'm like, well, would I rather get, if I think about the other players in NA, would I think that any one player would make a significant change in terms of an upgrade? No. I mean, we're looking at players that have been very good, that would be considered for the most part. Maybe Phoenix is the only one who you wouldn't say is towards the top of his position in NA, but I think he actually did pretty well over the course of the playoffs. So where do you go?
You don't want to buy 20 plus tickets to the Quaz lottery and just see how it works out this time. Like, put him on this champion, fingers crossed, that one worked.
I just think they need to commit to playing around Quas or playing around Piglet or playing around Phoenix and then just seeing how that goes, because they are just all over the fucking map.
What's interesting, though, about North America at the moment is that one of the positions North America is quite strong at in terms of the context of the West, though, is actually jungle position. Because you've got Rush, you've got I Will Dominate, you've got Meteos. I mean, okay, we can throw Santorin in there as well. I don't think of him as like a premier jungler, but okay, if he's like the fourth best jungler or third best, that's pretty good. I mean, that's actually a position at the moment. It's pretty strong in NA, I think.
Yeah, that's true.
It's one of the better positions.
Surprisingly, actually.
After this final, Monte, I think I might have said this on the last episode, but the worst thing that could have happened to Cloud9 was winning that semi-final. Because if they lose that semi-final, I don't think almost any excuse at that point in time can keep high in the lineup or can keep some sort of roster move from happening if they finish 3rd to 4th. But even so, this was so overwhelming the way they lost in the final. As an objective person, isn't this the time like something must be done? We can't just play that same thing out again for another season and hope it gets better.
I don't know.
But get to know, motherfucker. You're an analyst. Tell me.
I think that you have to make a change. I think that...
I mean, it doesn't have to be high. Is there another position? Like, could we change balls? Should we go with a top laner here? What do you think?
No, there are no other acceptable top laners in North America right now. You'd have to pay off probably a European contract, because a lot of the players, remember, are going to be contracted through the end of the year. So you have to buy out, like, I mean, if they want to buy out Cabashard or something like that, that could be really effective. So what do you do in that scenario? I think you keep balls high. Is Incarnation going to come play with him? But C9, they've hit the ceiling, right? They're not going to get better than they are with their current roster. They're a known quantity. Can they be top 3 in NA still next season? Oh, I'd put money on that, you know? I'd put money that they stay top 3, but they're not going to have a good showing at Worlds with the current roster. The edge that they had strategically has been caught up by teams like TSM, and I don't think they're going to have that same edge against some of the Korean and Chinese teams either, especially China with all their coaching. And China's play is it's still kind of crazy at times, but it does look cleaner. But the mechanical disadvantage that you have from High dying like 12 times in a game as Talon at Worlds is not going to go away, right? So I think they have to try something. Because they're not going to beat TSM anymore. That's not a thing that's going to happen.
What's funny is they really have. You know, I've always drawn the comparison between Moscow 5 and going into the Gambit era and Cloud9 in terms of like the special lineup and the way they just have these innate skills that seem to work from this lineup. The storyline even still fits, because I've always drawn the distinction between Moscow 5 and Gambit, because Moscow 5 was when they were the best, and they were the best in most of the roles, and they had all this dominance. And then Gambit was when they were still good players, but now they're having to really lean on that gimmick of like being able to team fight from behind. Now Cloud9's they're in the Gambit era at this point in time. Like, their best case scenario still might only narrowly win them games, and they have to really lean on it. They're not blowing anyone away. They're not wrecking people 3-0, and they're not going to smash the top teams. So if they have to have their best possible games just to get to a final, just to get through a semi-final, just to get into a top place at the end of the split, that's where I think it's obvious there's a ceiling. Like I don't know where you go from there. It's the same as at Worlds. I said the same thing. If you have to play amazingly to lose a tiebreaker game, I mean, that's not that great there. Your best case game is supposed to be where you win by a lot, and then a great team, you have those questionable games are when you just play okay. It's not when you play your best that you lose. That's why, to bring this in here, Monty, just for the sake of it. If there was a team in Korea, say, who could win these amazing games, but just narrowly over the best teams, but then they were losing to the worst teams, and they could always be competitive with the top, but it took everything out of them to be competitive with the top, I wouldn't be foolish enough to put my money on them to finish, say, top 3 in a league, or to beat a team like CJ. It just wouldn't happen, I'd be realistic. I'd see that it took their absolute best to get there. I'd just be objective about it, I wouldn't be biased, So, but I was still talking about Cloud9 there. I wasn't talking about Legionnaire or anything, Yeah. Interesting how that works. So, okay, do you think Cloud9 can retain top 2 status next season? Like, some of these teams surely can improve. Like, can't Tip improve? Can't Liquid improve?
Sure. I think Cloud9 can. They're just they work so well together as a team, and they've proven that for the most part they're pretty meta resilient, and they're still really good in a best of 5. Generally speaking, they still have that same edge. They still have enough strong players, and that I think they can do it. And their shot calling is still the best in NA. That is true. We saw that even in the TSM series. Unfortunately, they fell too far behind for it to make a difference, but they're very creative. They managed to get that inhibitor down in the mid lane with a split push Sivir that one game. They're good at playing from behind, so they'll still be able to surprise teams. And Hai's shot calling is good enough to overcome his deficiencies against most other NA teams.
This also is not the ideal time for the only one of your carry threats, your AD carry, to be the one that you have to lean on. Like the super tank meta era where motherfuckers build Thornmail and have Cinderhulk and you're damaging yourself more than you're doing damage to them is not the dream world in which to rely upon this AD carry to carry the whole game for you. Like, this probably isn't the right period for that to be your win conditions. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you.
Do you actually think that that's fair at the moment, Monty? Don't you think these tanks are too powerful now with the Cinderhulk as well?
Yes, they are too powerful. I think it needs to be dialed back.
Like, all these things on their own are fine. Cinderhulk's fine on its own. Thornmail's fine on its own. Tanky Champions are fine on their own. But it's like when you combine them all together, I think it's going to go back to that scenario of like early 2014 where it just fucks the AD carry so hard that it becomes very limited what you can do. And it becomes super hard to carry from that position,
Yeah, it's harder to carry from mid right now as well because you can't play those same assassins without the burst, right?
Yeah. So, fuck the mids, though. Fuck the mids, Monty. They've had 4 years of this shit. Like, it's our time to raise now. Like, you should be... As someone who is an aficionado of the top lane, Monty, boo-hoo. Oh, the mid lane. Oh, you can't burst everyone down in, like, 1 second flat with the same items that cost the same gold as the top laner. Yeah. It's a real shame, that is. Get the fucking smallest violin in the world out and play it for every fucking successful team in history. Had, like, some god mid laner wrecking everyone's head. Yeah, exactly. Okay, anyway, back on topic.
I agree. I mean, I think that there is a balance to be achieved here, and I think Riot will get to that, but it'll be after MSI. I think we'll see some.
Do you think the move,
MSI.
Since it's the one that made these things OP, is to do something about the jungle items?
Yes. Yeah.
What would your suggestion be? What's reasonable?
I don't know. I haven't thought too much about it. I think you need to lower the multiplicative stats onto Cinderhulk pretty significantly, and just make it so that the tank junglers, especially early on, there is more danger to using them. So there is possible counterplay with more dueling-oriented junglers like Lee Sin again, because we went from tanks being too weak in the jungle to, especially in the early part of the game, to way too strong because their clear is too easy. So you need to hit the middle ground right there.
Oh, and let's not forget, the whole rationale we were given as to why the jungle was changed was to make clearing like harder and not make it so sweet. Like, it's like, that's what's genius, is they always managed to fuck up their original premise.
It was too hard originally, and I think that in terms of clearing, the latest dialing it back has been somewhat useful, but they may have made it just a little bit too easy right now, especially with things like the Grunt buff allowing some of these tank junglers to clear with less risk. So we'll see. 5.7 obviously changed some of that stuff, but we've been on 5.7 for the last set of matches in Korea, and that didn't seem to stop CJ from wrecking Jin Air with all these tanks. So,
like, if you remember, I used to complain, Monty, about the tank meta in early season 4, because I used to say this, like, this is bullshit. Like, the top lane is super tanky. He's like an unkillable Mundo or like Trundle or something, and then on top of that, you know, the AD carry, it's like he's going to have difficulties being able to do enough damage. It's like, I didn't realize the timeline could get darker, Monty, because what happens now is, it's like, oh, by the way, the top lane is still super unkillable, okay? And he has a fucking jungle item that's OP. Wait a minute, why has he got that? Never mind, because look, there's also a jungler who's super tanky. What the fuck? And he also has the same jungle item. What? This is unfair. Like, and they all have Thornmail, okay? What else? It's like, yeah, what else? Actually, I had another point I was going to put up there. There's one more thing I was going to add in there. Let me think. To why it's OP against the AD carry. It's probably about the jungler. I'm trying to think what it would be. Okay, is there a way to fix the jungle items so that they still work only for the jungler in the same way without working for the top laner?
I think you have to nerf Skirmisher Saber. That's the thing that's going to take it out.
Oh, that's reminded me. That's just what's reminded me. So that was... I fucked the joke up there, Monty, because I forgot that part. So, yeah, okay, it's bullshit already that before you had the Uber tank, you couldn't kill. So now you've got the Uber tank, but then you notice that he's got his mate with him, like who's like a mini Uber tank, who's the jungler, and you're like, this is bullshit, there's two of them now, how am I even meant to win? Oh no, don't worry, they're also both smiting you the whole time as the AD carry, like, oh, this is just fucking great, isn't it? Like, if we ever needed more bullshit, like
also,
you know that joke, okay, in Game of Thrones, I always think that George R.R. Martin actually, like, when it was the 70s and he was like having fun, you know, he had a girl that he was in love with, some groovy chick where he thought they were going to be more, but they were just having fun. It was a free love era, and then some dude named Stark fucked her and just like went off with her and took him to his like place in the north, I assume. And so as a result, George R.R. Martin struck out at her with his artistry and his descriptions of food, and he decided, like, I will make their name known to the world's end and treat them in the most brutal way. I imagine in a similar way that Morello got really fucked over by some AD carry dude, and then a top laner at some point in time like stood up for him, like, no, I think that's fair, you know, like, you know, she's free to choose whoever she wants to be with. He was like, I'll get you as well, motherfucker, and you're first, like, step back, you know, like, that's what I think went on there at Retoy HQ.
The other thing too that's really funny about the whole thing, the whole meta and the tankiness of these top laners, is even at the end, if it gets to the ultra late game, we've seen Shy do this, which is he buys the blue elixir, the blue potion, which is made for mid laners, right? But the Thornmail magic damage return actually deals true damage as well. So at the end of the game, with one of these smite top laners, you're looking at an AD carry auto-attacking like a Hecarim that could have a Frozen Heart, a Gromp buff, Thornmail, and a Blue Pot. So he's returning both magic damage and true damage to himself, and getting smited and taking true damage that way too. It's ridiculous. Like, it's absurd. It's absurd.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, all you need to say, Monty, about how tanky shit's got, you know, it's now possible to be even more tanky than it ever was because of the bonus health. You can now have like 5,000 health and like whatever amount of armor, like some ludicrous amount. Like here's the problem. I've always said it should be like this. Like, there should be some sort of inherent balance between damage and armor. Like, I mean, that should be obvious, right? Because here's the thing that doesn't make sense in terms of this meta concept, is that it's actually unfair in terms of like AP champions. Because where are the items that fuck APs up like this? Like, I'd love it if an AP came on me and tried to burst me down, and it just does damage to him more than it does to me. Oh, let's go for that. Let's have that world. Let's see LeBlancs play that. You know, like, there's nothing like that for AP. Why is it only damage that gets fucked?
I don't know, man. I don't know.
That's great analysis. That's what we pay you for, Money. That's what we pay you for. So, anyway, back on topic. How will TSM do at MSI?
I think they can do pretty well, actually.
How well?
Like I said,
well?
I think
there's only 4 teams
are vulnerable
there,
to some cheese. I think they'll make semis and go out maybe in a 3-1 series against either the Chinese or the Korean team. But I think they're getting into a point where they can actually hold their own. If we look at TSM right now, I'd probably rank them somewhere around like 8th best team maybe in the world.
I think this is the best time that has ever existed. I'll add in the caveat post the era when the Western teams were the best, like when Moscow 5 was the best.
Right.
In the era since then, I think this is the best possible environment in which a Western team ever could win a big event like this.
Yes.
Because if you think about it, China has suddenly gone to shit, and even EDG don't look super dominant. And now, even if let's say LGD, okay, it turns out we're just the best team and we didn't know, and they 12-0 the playoffs. Well, who the fuck looks at LGD with Schwen and it's like, oh, well, they're unbeatable like that. Yeah. So then you go to Korea, and okay, GE Tigers have been the best in the season, but even if SKT beat them, SKT have had their issues at times, like. Almost there is no uber godlike strength that's inconceivable that it could be
because what happened in China was they took a bunch of the best Korean players, but we've talked about this. They haven't really used. It was just like a giant grab without, I think, a lot of thought about how they fit into the teams. So there's some very weird synergies in the Chinese teams, not to mention the language barriers. Korea lost a bunch of players, so even the teams that we see in Korea have been either cobbled together from the two teams fusing, like SK Telecom, or have had to find new rookie players, technically also like SK Telecom with Tom. So there's been a lot of destabilization of both the Korean and the Chinese scenes, and I think that does give the West a better chance than I think will appear at Worlds. I think that this IEM and this MSI, while the Chinese teams are still trying to figure their style of play out and integrate these multi-language teams, and then while the Korean scene is waiting for some of these rookies to really come into their prime after their initial seasons, that this is a very good time for TSM.
I think they can win a game. I think that's not really. I don't think they can win a series against whoever wins from China or Korea. I'm certain will win the series against TSM.
Yeah, that does seem very likely.
I mean, I don't have any reasons to believe they wouldn't.
Right.
I mean, if anyone's like, but IEM, it's like, well, don't worry about it. Team WE isn't going to be there, so what's the problem? Yeah, I don't follow your logic. Sorry. Yeah.
Also, to Team WE's credit, that iteration of Team WE did do significantly better and nearly beat EDG in the quarters.
with you. Just add that in there, Monte. And they also lost 2 games to them with you, so just saying. Yep. 50% win rate. So,
but there's no denying that WE improved after making those rosters.
Yeah, well, certainly, yeah. Let's move into China then. So in China, Jesus Christ,
we sort of covered this last week. We covered quarters up until, because we had all had just been watching the King versus Snake game. And by the way, this is what drives me crazy about the fan base here. I called King versus Snake a shit show too. It was the same quality of play, in my opinion, strategically as Unicorns of Love versus FNATIC. But nobody cared about that. Nobody cared that Snake versus King was also a terrible match.
Well, you say nobody. I mean, first of all, probably, Monty, like a lot of Chinese people probably don't watch the show. And then secondly, I don't know Chinese, so I imagine if you translated it, maybe they would have been like, American pig dog, he talks shit. You go home, Yankee. Why you in Iraq? Why? Like, maybe they were saying that much. I don't know.
Maybe they were, but it's another 5-game series that was extremely exciting and had a ridiculous amount of fun. By the way, if you like Unicorns of Love versus FNATIC, shut up and go watch this series because you'll love it too. But same thing. Felt the same way about Snake versus King. I don't want to touch those games to review with the 10-foot pole.
Okay, so one of the problems with this playoffs, Monty, is that the Chinese playoffs has been one of the most underwhelming playoffs I think I've ever seen.
It's super disappointing.
And then on top of that, it's simultaneously derailed a whole bunch of the potential cool storylines and cool runs of all these teams. So we did last week. The game we hadn't talked about last week, Monty, was OMG versus LGD.
Because it hadn't happened yet. Yeah.
OMG, it's like they didn't even turn up to this series. No one did anything in any position on this game. That guy doesn't exist anymore. Fucking Cool was crap, basically, and he's supposed to be the clutch player. Uzi actually wasn't particularly impressive. Like, the OMG experiment, as far as I can tell, has failed. It's finished 5th to 8th with that level of talent. And they were the only all-Chinese lineup.
What a shocking turn of events, too, because I personally think that the biggest transfer in League of Legends history was Uzi to OMG, because it seemed to be so good on paper, right? And we know that this team does have very strong solo laners. They have this jungler like Loveling, who's shown up a big time at other tournaments. It's shocking that it went the way it did, right, with OMG. It's really shocking.
Not only that, but they did the classic where You know, this meta, Monte, is all about pick mid lane Lulu, lose. That's like the meta that we're in right now. Cool did that as well. He had a game where he picked mid lane Lulu.
Like, telecom.
Yeah, it works if you're a god. Like, for normal people I'm talking about here. Like, if you pick mid lane Lulu, that's almost like calling a surrender vote in the pick ban phase. Like, that's why my joke to Svenskeren...
It is if you run a tank top laner. I think if you run Rumble or something that has a lot of mid-game... that has some mid-game strength to it, that doesn't require a lot of scaling, so you can't just lose everything early on and just fall into an enormous gold deficit. It's okay, and as long as you don't need, as long as you have another source of viable damage, I think it's fine. I think it's fine with Rumble.
Because the thing is, I wanted to see...
I'm not a fan of it in almost any situation, though.
Like, since that was Wayless versus Cool, I wanted to see Cool on his assassins, on those strong champions, and let's see them head-to-head battle. So when one of them picks Lulu, it's like, come on, man, that's not what anyone fucking wants to see. I don't pay to see Lulu. Get out of here, Lulu.
Come on, you did get to see Wayless's Orianna. That's always fun.
Yeah, that's great. So, So there was that series. Then we went into the semi-finals. And remember, Monte, the hyped matchup here was going to be IG versus EDG. Because in theory, as everyone was telling me, here's an interesting thing, Monte. I always make this joke that there's the reason people hype up other countries. So people say like Korea is the country where esports is accepted and stuff. It's not really, but the reason people do that, I always think comes culturally. I've actually analysed this, Monte, like meta criticism. I think it culturally comes from when people used to have that myth that there was some country out there where like the streets are paved with gold and like poor people go there and like that's where they make their fortunes and people are welcoming to foreigners there, and wherever it was, it shifts places depending on where the story is, Monte. So it's like it's in Persia or it's in Europe or it's wherever it is, it moves around because the whole point is it doesn't exist. So likewise, in this particular sort of scenario, people were talking about the smartest Chinese team, and I noticed it magically kept hopping from team to team as teams were eliminated. Okay, so originally the smartest Chinese, Monte, was VG. They were the smartest Chinese team. Then IG beat them. And suddenly IG were the smartest team. They understood strategy and counter strategy, and they were smart. And now that they've got their shit pushed in, now suddenly LGD is the smartest team. They're the team who understand what they're doing. Like, it's just changing every time. So this smartest team, IG, went up against EDG, and that was a fucking crap series. Like, that was nothing. That wasn't even IG being IG. They weren't even doing any of that aggressive shit. What was it?
I don't know. I'm surprised that this match was as hyped up as it was, because the Demacia Cup, we did see the EDG 3-0 of IG in the finals anyway, right? So they didn't really look particularly competitive up against what EDG was throwing at them, and EDG was styling on them with Fizz in that final as well. These matches were quite boring and quite one-sided in favor of EDG, in my opinion. The only fault I would say is that EDG actually took longer to close and made more mistakes than I thought they would.
Like, for me, that whole series can be summed up like this, Monte. The first 15 minutes of all three games is Pawn in, like, full Samsung White styling mode. Like, I'm going to fuck you up and solo kill you and, like, make you look like shit. Then after 15 minutes, he, like, high-fives Deft, who then just carries all the team fights and the game's over. Like, there was no moment in between them, by the way, where you could do anything if you were Kakao. We could do anything if you're IG. Like, I don't know what plays you were meant to make.
Even in game 2, where they actually did get the early advantage by having that nice tower dive, Pawn was able to get that sheen on Kassadin and just come back because he and Clearlove just repeatedly ganked Rookie to death, and they made a risky item choice decision, but it really paid off for them. Like, you could see that they were desperate to get back into the game after losing a couple kills early in the lane swap and the dive, and then they have a plan in the game how they're going to burst down this guy in the mid lane to get Kassadin ahead, and then Pawn just shits on everyone.
Like, didn't you find it kind of startling how easily Pawn shit on Rookie's Azir, bearing in mind Rookie knows how to play LeBlanc? You would think like he would understand what was possible, but it almost reminded me of some of the faker LeBlanc plays where the other guy thinks he's close enough to the tower that he can't really be done, and then he just knows like, no, I can definitely get a hop in there.
It is really good. It is really good. So that's, you think we're going to see some of that at MSI, but you can't let Pawn have LeBlanc, just like you can't let Faker have LeBlanc right now. He is probably, with Faker, the top 2 LeBlanc players in the world.
What is your evaluation of Rookie, though? Because in this series, he didn't really show up.
No, he didn't. I don't know what happened to him. I really like watching his Azir play, actually. I think he's a very interesting and aggressive Azir player, but we also see him going back to Yasuo. I mean, he's got the Xiao Wei Xiao syndrome, I guess. I don't get that at all.
The problem is, though, I mean, he is a good Azir player, but I get worried when you're an Azir versus a LeBlanc and you can't keep him off you and he's getting in and fucking you up. Like, that's the whole point of that champion, is like you keep them at distance, you poke them off.
Well, yeah, but they can poke you too, and you don't really have crowd control in order to back it up. Like, you can't react like you can with Lissandra with Ring of Frost or anything like that to keep the LeBlanc there. At best, you can kind of put some Sand Soldiers up where they're going to W back to, but I think it's an interesting matchup, but I think it's more about skill than anything else. And IG's drafts are also super weird. Why would you pick Yasuo when you have like a Nidalee in the jungle? There's just very little kill pressure on the mid lane with that combination. It's just bad. So their drafts were a problem. I think the champions they played didn't give them the best chance of success, and EDG is just way better.
Maybe they consulted, like, IG really wanted the best chance to win, so they consulted some foreign experts and they asked Jat, and Jat told them that that actually rookie's own signature champion was Yasuo, and that they should really make him play.
It was. I mean, he was a very good Yasuo player back in the day. That's undeniable. He played a lot.
It's not really a meta champion now, though.
No, it's not. It's terrible.
What did you think about the fact that somehow in these games we had 3 totally different picks in mid lane for all 3 games? Like, is there even a meta? Have I missed something, Monty? What year is this? Like, everything's viable now? What even are these matchups?
There are a lot of viable champions. That's why the meta is so fun right now. Actually, is in some ways, while I think the jungle is a little bit one-dimensional, it has opened up a lot of other picks that can be used, and it's interesting to see. Also, riskier picks because the junglers aren't as good at ganking in the early game, so you can pick champions that scale up a little better. But Pawn playing Fizz is really just styling, I'm pretty sure. It's just because he's a god Fizz player. It's not because it's a great pick in the current meta.
So just to fuck with Svenskeren, because they told us all that shit about Clearlove having 100% kill participation and like he's involved in all this shit, I made the joke that like all those early ganks were actually just Koro coming down. If you noticed, like he would come down on Hecarim and just come in and gank mid lane. The top laner came down at like 4 minutes to gank the mid lane. Like, come on, man. Where's my jungler at? Where's he? Oh, he's off playing Nunu or some shit. Okay, that's great. What did you think overall of EDG? Because here's the thing, they won the series 3-0. Yeah, I don't hear everyone super hyped like they're undefeated. They're gonna crush like they're unbeatable. They're gonna crush the LPL final. This is gonna be easy. Why is the hype subsided a bit?
I wasn't actually that impressed with their lane swapping in this series, and they opened themselves up to some early tower dives like we were talking about earlier, and it wasn't as clean or they didn't push advantages either. In terms of closing out the game, I felt that they opened themselves up to some risk in that department. And also, yeah, I think their drafts were fine, maybe a little bit of an overemphasis on Gnar. And yes, before everybody jumps down my throat, I know that Koro's like has a 100% win rate on Gnar this season or whatever, but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily the strongest pick. So I don't know. I just saw some sloppiness in terms of their strategic play, looking at the lane swaps and looking at how they were closing games, that made me a bit concerned.
After IEM, you were one of the people who said like, oh, EDG is probably the best team in the world. Like, you know, like they'd be right up there. Do you have a working theory as to why they're no longer at that level? Like, were the other teams still figuring shit out? Because obviously China was like a massive upheaval area. Is there some reason? Can they get back to the level that they were at before then?
I don't know. We look at what the major change was, which was the Cinderhulk patch and the change to the meta. And in my mind, I just see SKT and CJ really doing well with this patch and probably doing the best out of any of the teams on this new patch. And I think EDG has struggled a bit more with... They're still looking good on this patch, there's no doubt, but I'm not sure they're so clear-cut as the best team when I can look at SKT and see what they're doing.
Okay, LGD versus EDG. Who wins?
I don't know. Looking at LGD, I'm not surprised they won and they dominated this series, but they had some pretty bad level ones, especially in Game 3, where they played very risky for not a lot of reason and found themselves down a couple kills, and it was up to Wayless to really carry the game on Orianna. I do like their picks. I really like Game 2. I thought they were extremely efficient at closing that game. Imp was on fire, 100% kill contribution rate, like 11-11 on Jinx. But Snake also is that team that we're just kind of waiting to get exposed this whole season, right? They play that very aggressive, skirmish-oriented, sloppy style, and they were just super punished for it against LGD. But, yeah.
And in every respect, like, think of this. This was another series where, on paper, this is what happened to Loveling in the first series. In theory, the ultra weak spot of LGD is their jungler. And not only that, their jungler didn't even have a good champion pool previously. So in theory, Loveling, and then now Beast especially, someone who's been highly touted as one of the stars of Snake, they should be exposing this guy, and they weren't, actually. He didn't really have a whole lot of impact on the series, really.
Well, Flandre, I think, is the player that most people point to on
He was hyped so hard.
Yeah.
And in this series, hey, listen, Flandre was even known to be good at Rumble and all that shit. So he played Rumble, and it didn't go too well. And then the Lord came in Game 3, took out that Gnar, built pure damage, started bashing on some skulls.
Right, and I don't know what Schwen...
just dismissive there, like, okay. Oh, was that the flame segment? Okay, we're done with that. Back to the analysis. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I gotta ignore it at some points.
Okay.
You know, Schwen or TBQ or whatever you want to call him, they had some interesting strategies. Of course, we did see the Sejuani and the Rek'Sai banned out early, so it was sort of a Gragas and Nunu matchup. And he played Nunu in 3 games, or 2 games, and then Sejuani in 1. So I'm not sure exactly how we'll do, but I think I trust a lot of the Chinese analysts' take on this situation, which is that Schwen is much better in this meta where he doesn't have to. He's sort of like Bengi, right? Except Bengi's probably better in terms of vision control. He's like a lesser Bengi. Ooh, that's a
the lesser of 2 Bengis.
It's a bad thing to say about somebody, I think. But anyway, Bengi, I think, is still very smart in terms of how he plays on the map and the way he counter jungles and the way he gets warding down. He's very intelligent and has good foresight in that way. But he's just not. You can't expect him to make big mechanical plays, right? And I think Schwen is the same way, where he's benefiting as a player that his weaknesses are not quite as obvious in this patch. And to his credit, I think he did well during this series. I wouldn't bet that he's going to do as well in the next series, but...
This was also, like, this series was like the ultimate, just like sexual dream in League expressive terms for people who were like hardcore fans of Chinese LoL who despise Crystal. Because this was like all their dreams came true. Like, he had a poor series, he got utterly exposed by him. He even played Draven, still got his head caved in. Like, this was everything they dreamed of and more in this one series. Like, I mean, there was clear... Listen, he obviously was good in the regular season, so to me, there was some sort of performance issue here. He just didn't really show up in this series. He'd already had a reasonably poor series, even against King, so the whole playoffs, he wasn't close to the guy he was in that regular split where he was murdering people, you know.
Yeah, I think that's true too. And oops, sorry. I think that most people have been waiting for Snake to get exposed, and I think that it's kind of finally happened. Like, this is a pretty devastating 3-0 in my mind, and I think Snake's. This is an example of that same style of play that we were talking about with Unicorns of Love and the KT Arrows early on. Is that you can just sometimes get absolutely rocked. If a team is patient enough and willing just to sit there and their game plan is, well, you're going to do something crazy and just wait for it to happen and not try and make any plays until you make a play first, play a reactive defensive style, this is kind of what you get.
What would you put the odds at for the final? Like, what percentage is EDG to win? What percentage is LGD to win?
I don't know. I think LGD ended up having a pretty easy run through the playoffs. Right, you know, OMG and Snake. These are teams that have been kind of a mess, and certainly LGD has turned it up. They were the 6th place, and now they've taken out seeds 2 and 3 from the regular season. But you look at the way that LGD plays, and Acorn's always been a great player in terms of his teleport usage and setting up side wave pressure. That's one of the reasons why Samsung Blue was so innovative in that lane swap when they were the kings of the lane swap throughout most of 2014, was because they were really good at playing with minion wave pressure and getting the right TPs and the right timings in. And he's showing that he can still show up with that today.
No, that was the problem, though, is that it's obvious LGD's level has gone up since the regular split, but the other thing that was a problem is that their level went up. They did turn it up, as you say, but in the end, OMG didn't show up at all, and then Snake looked shaky even in their own series before then against King, and then looked even crapper in the semi-finals.
Yeah,
so yeah,
they had an easy run.
So okay, LGD did turn up, but for what? You know, they had to. It was like there wasn't anything to battle them and give them resistance.
I would say 65% EDG.
Okay, I'm thinking EDG's going to win it. I think LGD can win some games, but
I think 65%. I think EDG's going to win as well. So,
I mean, EDG just has the players as well. Like I put it like this when I was talking to Svenskeren on my show there. The main factor that I see when I try to pick out an X factor, I'm not going to go with the X factor of like, oh, well, they've still got Schwern and he's a problem. That's like I think that's like too simplistic. Like it hasn't been a problem previously, and they've been playing better junglers. So to me, the real X factor for this final is how Wayless plays, because in my opinion, Wayless has to be amazing, because the guy who can win this whole series outright for EDG is Pawn, because I already know what Deft and Imp are going to do. They're going to play to the level we know in the same style they play, and I imagine they're both going to be strong, win or lose. I think the top laners for both teams are just going to do what they do. They're going to every position almost is going to be fine, and the difference is we haven't got any disparity at the bot lane here because we've got good support AD carry pairings on both sides. So to me, the real X factor is essentially Pawn. Actually, if I'm phrasing it correctly, it should be the X factor is Pawn. Like if Pawn plays anything like he did in that IG series and just outplays the other mid laner, which is Wayless in this case, it's over. Like there's not even any chance for LGD. So Wayless has to have like some legendary performance in my opinion.
The other factor to I think about here is lane swaps, because if I think LGD is the better lane swap team. As long as they don't just walk into unwarded jungle and take unnecessary risk. But the lane swaps were an issue for EDG, and I think that if LGD cleans up their level 1s, their lane swaps will be stronger. So if they can get a big lead for Acorn, that could also be a pretty big factor.
Here's an interesting question for you though, Monte, because another reason why I think mid lane is going to be very interesting is because Pawn can play so many champions and so many of the strong assassins that it puts quite a quandary onto Wayless. Well, he's called God V now, but you know what I mean. Which is that he has to ask, like, do they waste a lot of target bans on Pawn? If they do waste them on Pawn, does that mean that champions that Wayless wants to play are getting taken out? Like, what do you think in terms of the mid lane matchup of champs?
Well, I think that Wayless is more likely to play backhorse, as Azir was banned. The Azir was banned by LGD, excuse me. So his Orianna, that's what I meant to say, was banned in this series, except for the game 3, which, I mean, we know how hard he can carry on Orianna. His Orianna play is very impressive. I'm intrigued to see if he's going to go for some more of these passive champions like Anivia, because even though I think that they're very good, and I really, really liked how LGD played with Anivia, it does open up potentially Pawn for some roams around the map. And on some of these assassins that could be quite deadly. I think probably Kassadin will be banned the entire series, and I think Orianna will probably be banned for a lot of the series as well. And then it's what Wayless falls back on, because Rookie, I mean, he's pretty dangerous on that LeBlanc too, so we'll be curious to see what the bans are. Probably a lot of mid lane bans from both sides.
So here's an interesting scenario though, is what happens in terms of the bot lane champion pool, because actually these two players, Deft and Imp, don't really play like this. They don't have massively overlapping champions, even though AD carry is not like the most diverse position. Like, you know, do you think, like, which way do you see that going? Do you think one of them should target ban another one? Like, is it even worth wasting bans on Deft?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they both play Jinx, even though Deft does have more of a predilection for playing that Jinx. I don't think AD carries are worth banning out in this matchup. They're both versatile enough that I don't think it'll be making a big difference.
And do you think in the final will Deft be on like Lucian, Jinx? Will it be Kog'Maw? Will it be Imp? What will he be on? You know, how do you see this?
Sivir, Kalista would be, I think.
His Kalista's been very good. That's
yes, Kalista's been really boss. So
Kalista's like a champion designed for him. First of all, you can throw the fucking support into the enemy while you do outlaws, and you can literally just like do that ridiculous stuff where you like. It almost reminds me of some of the mid lane champions where you can just dive under a tower, kill someone, and then get back out. Like that's like a dream for him.
I don't think that actually Kalista might be banned, because we've seen that EDG doesn't put a priority on first picking it or anything like that, and in fact they just let Kid have it a couple times during their last series. They like to have it every game, in fact. Whereas Snake was banning that Kalista because we know how good Imp can be on that champion. So.
Okay, so here's the question though, Monte. Another problem with the way the playoffs worked out is that we actually currently, after 6 playoff games, still have no clue as to what the prevailing philosophy is for LGD on when to use Acorn and when to use Flame, because they never lost a game.
He's the
so all they
closer.
did, all they did was
Thorin.
they went up 2 games, and then the 3rd game, when they could afford to anyway, they used Flame. So we don't know. Here's what would have been interesting: is if in one of those series, let's say they'd lost game 1, would they have immediately brought Flame in? Would they have stuck with Acorn? Okay, let's say they win there and they go to 1-1. In game 3, did they just stick with Acorn because they just won with him? We never got to see any of these permutations. So at the moment, for all we know, maybe they don't even use Flame at all in the final. Maybe it's Acorn the whole way. What do you think?
I have no idea what their philosophy on using these 2 players are. I really do think that they're just styling with Flame at the end right now, and that they'll use Acorn for most of the games.
What's so confusing to me is you know that whole thing about maybe EDG's just LGD rather is just experimenting by making the players play champions outside of their comfort pool. That's not really what's happened. Like, what's bizarre is they've literally made both players into the opposite style. Flame now plays 100% Rumble and Gnar. Meanwhile, at the moment, Acorn is a Hecarim main. I don't even know what's going on here. What is that?
It is pretty.
But you know the craziest part about it, Monte, is that it's worked. Both of them have actually shown proficiency now after enough time on these champions. Like, Acorn's doing great on Hecarim. Flames, Gnar has actually become good. He couldn't even play that before. He never even used to play Rumble.
Yeah, it's true. Of course, Chunju Acorn was one of the most feared Rumble players in Korea. It's
I wonder
weird.
if...
I don't know.
See, I actually suspect that Flame might not appear in the final.
I think he probably won't, actually.
Like, to me, the main way they'd use him is actually if they lose games. Like, as in, if they just feel like, well, that's like an option to mix something up, to try something different if it's not working. Like, for me, Acorn probably has to feed in order to Flame to get in the series.
Yeah, I think it's really unlikely we'll see him in the finals.
Like, I suspect, it's my speculation, Monty, from seeing the way things have worked, that LGD has been playing the long con the whole time. Like, what this has been all about is Flame exists just as the way to discipline and keep Acorn motivated. Like, at all times, we've got a guy who's better looking than you, he's more famous than you, he'll come in and play those characters. If you can't play Charity Champions, we've got a guy who'll come right in and play them. Like, you better stick on your game. So he's on point, he's on top of his game, because he knows if he doesn't, they just bring in Flame. But I actually think in the finals, they're just going to have the normal lineup, I think. I don't think Flame will play, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really unlikely.
Here's hoping, Monty. I'll have my fingers crossed that Acorn sucks a mad dick for those first 2 games. I'll be cheering on every EDG tower dive. Like, Clear Love, if you ever wanted to prove yourself, my friend, and win some affection from me, dive early and often. Early and often. Regular.
You have to give him the SK Spinner Man and hope it lands on Sometimes You Suck a Cock.
That is one of the best Photoshops I've seen in a long time, by the way. That is phenomenal, that work that they've done. That is beautiful right there. Okay, what else? Okay, if you had a player for LGD who can play above and beyond the normal level, and that'll win them the series, who are you going to pick?
What? But the LGD EDG?
Yeah.
I said EDG 65%.
No, a player that can be the X factor to make the win for LGD. Like, who do you think needs to be like the hero performance to win them the game?
Like
I mean, if Imp wins those team fights,
I think Acorn has to do it because I think Acorn has to get a smite jungler. They do really well in a lane swap, and he gets like 1 million more farm than Koro.
Okay, if EDG went to MSI, what would your sense be? Are they going to be the champions of MSI if they go?
I think if SK Telecom goes, no. I think they have a better shot. I think they have a better shot against the GE Tigers because I think that they have a good matchup in the mid lane with Pawn versus Kuro, whereas Pawn versus Faker is going to be not so one-sided, right? So I think if SK Telecom goes, I would put them as the favorites, and I just need to see how GE looks. I mean, I haven't seen GE in like weeks now because they go dark before the finals, so I'm not going to be able to make an informed opinion. I think before I see the finals in Korea.
Just think of the level of tilt you would be on though, Monty. If EDG and SKT go, and then Pawn wrecks Faker solo in lane a bunch of times. We might just have to quit. Another one of those scenarios where we might have to just quit League of Legends. Like, I can't.
That's right.
You won't be able to ever read Reddit again without your brain just frazzling, you know.
Well, it's happened before. People love to talk about that.
What if they go into those games, LeBlanc is left up, and you're like, great, Faker's going to pick it. But then Faker just suddenly, you know, it gets to him, like the realization of what he's facing, and he just locks in Orianna, and then Pawn looks over at him like, it's customary to kneel when surrendering to a king. Like, that would be the moment right there, man. Yeah, another Game of Thrones impression there. Okay, busting them all out now. Stannis, we've got it there. Okay, so I don't know if I could handle that, dude. Like if SKT go, I need Faker to ultra dumpster Pawn. By the way, that happened in OGN Winter. I don't know why you all pretend that one didn't happen. That was real. That was real life, by the way. That one counted. You know that WCD qualifier? Not that big a deal. You know that the OGN quarterfinal? That one counted. Okay, that one counted. That happened.
Well, the finals, yeah. Yes, the quarterfinals. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, there have been good examples both ways. And the last time, too, for Worlds that had happened, they picked Faker into horrible matchups in the mid lane, too. So I don't think that would happen again.
Also, Faker now doesn't play Ziggs, so I feel like we can actually have a real game now. Not the anti-champion there, like, oh, this does nothing. It just farms. Okay, let's put the best player ever on it, the best playmaker ever, whose name literally rhymes with playmaker, and that everyone says constantly. Let's put him on Ziggs. This is a great meta. Like, okay, this is fine.
Which he played more than any other champion.
Why not? Monty, did you like my tweet? You know when someone put out that Reddit post where they'd calculated all of Faker's stats on every champion?
Yeah.
You know Faker's stats on champions are insane, by the way. He has very few that aren't like 60 to 100%. Of all of the champions he's picked the most, you look up the list and it's all like 100%, 75%, 66%, 100%, 66%. Then suddenly, in the top sort of 5 or 6, you see Lulu has been picked like 10 times, and even Faker's only 50% on it. So it's like, guys, attention mid laners of the world, it is time to officially give up on Lulu. Even Faker is only 50% on it. Just give it up. That's all that needs to be said. That's it. That's the end for Lulu. It's over. Come on, man. It's like the best player ever.
Yeah. I agree with you.
Okay, so that was if EDG goes. But if EDG goes, Monty, then they have to play TSM. How would that go, eh?
Pretty sure TSM will lose that. They're going to just get overpowered in terms of just the better players on EDG, I think.
You mean because... Oh, here's an interesting one for you, Monty. The only player on EDG who conceivably is worse is Mako.
That's what I was about to say too, actually.
That's the only player I can think of who you could say is... And even then, that's not like a massive difference, because first of all, he's not playing in NA, guys. He's not playing versus fucking Adrian, is he? Like, let's get reasonable here, shall we? He's playing versus people like Mata and stuff. Yeah, that's pretty good. Beyond that, you know, okay, I'll give it to Losbo because he's got the experience and the pedigree and some great form, but if every other position is outmanned, like, yeah, that's going to be hard. That's going to be hard. That's all I'm saying. Although,
Agreed.
Monty, who would you possibly cheer for if you had to watch a best of 5 between Santorin and Clearlove? No matter who wins, it's bad for you. It's bad for the game, quite frankly. No matter who wins, the glory would destroy any of us. You know, you have to hope for some sort of tie where they both feed and don't have any impact on the game. You know, it's the best case scenario. What if LGD went to MSI? What would happen then, Monty?
I still think that's a really favorable matchup for LGD. I mean,
this is TSM, you mean here?
Yeah, I think the only person you would put there who TSM would have an advantage is Santorin. I mean, PYL is one of the best supports in China. Imp, Acorn, Wayless.
I mean, it's conceivable Bjergsen's better than Wayless. I don't mind saying that right now. Wayless hasn't done that much. Yeah, that would be the interesting matchup, obviously. Now, I don't think he's enough
better to make it a huge difference, though.
I know people get upset when we bring up Wild Turtle and his interesting demeanor, thoughts on the game, playing style. But let's not even pretend like it's a debate if Imp is better than Wild Turtle. Let's not even go there. Let's just leave that out there as we all agree.
TSM would 100% look to lane swap in that situation. Imp and PYL are really good in laning phase, and I would be very concerned for Wild Turtle just straight up dying.
What if LGD had to face the best Korean team, though?
I mean, it depends on matchups versus SKT. I think LGD would not do particularly well against any of the, against the Korean teams going. I think that there are pretty good matchups there for the Korean teams, honestly.
Okay, right, let's go into Korea then. In Korea, we only had one series play, Monte. So Indeed. We're going to have to put all of our attention on this one series. And this series, in case anyone hasn't been keeping track of things, was Monte's much hyped Jin-Air. Jin-Air are better than CJ.
Hey,
Jin-Air are the third best team.
Don't even do this. Don't even fucking
But in the past, though, you did say these things. Okay, so
before the Cinderhulk patch, I did not have any confidence in Jin-Air.
Was there no adaptation?
We talked about it last week.
Was there no adaptation they could have made to make it more competitive this series, though?
They did make some pick adaptations, but I didn't like their strategy of going for the dual lane in mid with the Jinx and then trying to 1v2 with the Shyvana. I think Ambition played really well around that with his invades and fighting over jungle camps so that the Shyvana couldn't get farmed. And game one, it was a disaster. I think they should have given the blue buff to GBM and had him 2v1 and had the Shyvana 1v1 if they were going to do that. But Ambition was really a lot of the credit for adapting during this series and trying to get some of those creeps away from Trace's Shyvana.
But didn't you say Chaser was the best jungler in Korea?
I do think he's very good, and I do think that he was invading consistently to take as much of an edge as he could off of the strategy. I think the strategy itself was flawed. That's what I believe. But and I think that CJ played super well, even better than I thought they were going to play. And CJ, interestingly, has won every single game since they've played since Cinderhulk was introduced. And Jin-Air has lost every single game since Cinderhulk was introduced. Ever since we went to 5.5, Jin-Air is now 0-9, and CJ is 9-0.
So what you're saying is this patch has had a momentous effect on the records. You missed that one, Marmon. Anyway, whatever. Puns. That's how puns work for you. They're supposed to actually work, but also mean something at the same time. You got the first part right. You didn't get the second part. Okay. So in this scenario, though, Monte, I like the way you mentioned the Trace there. I mean, Shy obviously had a great series. You mentioned Trace, though, I noticed. Like, light up a candle for Trace, for Monte's dreams that Chase would ever be this great top laner, because blow the candle out now. As it is extinguished, as the last smoke fades away, so go his career and your hopes and his dreams.
I don't think Jin-Air is a team that has individual...
How many seasons, Monte? Is this like what? Is this like the 5th season where you're telling me this shit? Like, eventually it has to happen sooner or later.
Well, they have Sky, the Zenix player, on the bench if they ever want to use him. So they do have a backup top laner. But in any event, I think Jin-Air had fine players this season. I think the meta shift just hit them really, really hard. Really, really hard. And they couldn't play the style that had gotten them a lot of success previously, and they didn't adapt well as a team to the changes that were coming in. And their pick and ban phase was pretty much a disaster up until the match against CJ. But even then, they came in with this really bizarre strategy that I don't think was even theoretically effective. So it's unfortunate, but what can you do? CJ, though, looks fantastic. I think that's the much more interesting storyline here is likely how good the CJ SK Telecom games are going to be this week, because CJ reacted in-game very well. They team fought beautifully. They pushed advantages. Oh, man, like their aggression was perfect.
See, I actually, you know what, here's the problem, Monte. I shouldn't have mentioned it earlier because it got it going in my mind, and I've just realised that when you talked about this, it has made me come up with the Jack dilemma for this week. So here's the Jack dilemma for this week, Monte. What you should do to retain your cognitive dissonance in the world and not have to address what happened is you should just say, yeah, but I did say that Jin-Air's strength is that they always play up to the level of the elite teams, and versus the elite teams, they compete and they're always close, but they have a problem of losing to the lesser teams. So actually CJ beating them doesn't prove that CJ is a better team. It shows that CJ is a worse team because Jin-Air only loses to the... See what I did there? We got there in the end, Monty. We got to the dilemma. Good.
You.
Hashtag Jack dilemma. Hashtag suggested by Monty. Okay.
No.
Requests from Monty. Okay, so explain this to me, Monty. This exciting Jin-Air team, GBM, one of the playmakers of the season, looking wonderful at certain times. This team who knew how to get into fights, how to make the game work around favourable situations. How does a team like that get 5 kills in 3 games?
Yeah, they were just terrible, weren't they?
Do you think there's some sort of coaching problem in the team?
I think the fact that they couldn't adapt at all and even win 1 game after Cinderhulk was introduced is a pretty big fucking problem, yeah. I think their talent is fine. I think their players are fine. So, yes, I would say that one.
Does
right
this
there.
patch have an effect on Chaser, though? Hasn't it pushed him off some of the champions he was super strong on?
Right, and he was good at ganking lanes early, and he can't have that much of an early game effect anymore either. But Chaser is also not very good at initiating team fights. His major flaw is that he doesn't work well with Che in terms of when to go in and when to decisively engage in team fights. That's a big issue with him, actually. And by reviewing Jin Air's games, I can see Che going in while Chaser goes out. It's really awkward, actually. So they have problems being decisive. They're really good at kiting and disengaging. They're not very good at engaging as a team. And in this meta, that's a huge problem.
So what you're saying is the Chaser isn't that good at running people down, engaging them. Like, shout outs to that Chinese movie there. You know, a little bit of meta humor there, guys.
Yeah. Meanwhile, the other hand is that CJ Entis is very good at engaging these team fights. And I really liked the Ziggs pickup by Coco, too, because it's like a better version of Xerath for this meta. Higher damage, faster burst, really good.
So we're here, Monte. We're near the end of the season now. And no matter what happens, nothing can change this, Monte. CJ will be at worst the 3rd best team in Korea. What the fuck is that? Could you have any explanation? How did they do it? How have they developed as a team? How have they become the 3rd best? At least they might be 2nd yet, Monte, but I imagine you think not. So top 3, how have they managed to make it?
No, I think that'll probably be a 5-game series versus SK Telecom.
Honestly. Oh boy, you see, Monte. Once those floodgates open, they have a tendency to get ripped right open, and suddenly.
No. It's just that this team has adapted very well to this patch overall. So I think it'll be 3-1 or 3-2 for SK Telecom, but I do think CJ Entis is going to win a game or 2.
So what is the win conditions for CJ to win a game or 2?
I think as long as Mad Life continues to play super well and they're very well set up. I think they have a good read on the meta right now, like SK Telecom does. Ambition's really been improving in terms of his jungling. He's been getting progressively more aggressive and willing to counter jungle. I think they team fight really well. I think Mad Life has really stepped up. He was great throughout this series. And I think one of the big things about CJ Entis is that their individual play has improved. If we look at Shy and Mad Life, they're getting back up to where they used to be.
What do you think in terms of... Okay, I asked the Flame question before. Will we see Easy Hoon in this series?
No.
No chance?
No chance.
Okay, that's an interesting one to watch out there for, guys. What are the win conditions for SKT?
I think SKT can play comfortably here and win. They can continue just to pick these very tanky team compositions and patiently wait out the game. I think that Marin and Shy is a really interesting matchup because both of these guys really like to play those Smite top laners, and they play with a lot of pressure, split push pressure by themselves. But so that's the similarity of their style, I think, should be quite interesting. And SKT seems to have settled on a style where Marin mostly just plays tanks, whereas we see a little bit more of that in the playoff match from Shy, who is playing just Hecarim and just Shyvana. But we also know that Shy has been playing more carry top laners as of late than Marin has. I don't know. It's going to be.
Do you think
really
either of them goes super tank mode, or do you think they go carry top? Which do you have a feeling for?
I think it's going to be Shyvana versus Hecarim again if those two champions are both available, like we saw versus Jin Air. I think it's just going to be tanks. So Faker, does he get LeBlanc? That's an interesting question. LeBlanc is obviously going to be super highly prioritized during this series because Coco's very good at it as well, and we often see it banned versus him.
If SK Telecom loses this best of 5 to CJ, will you go into like a mini depression for like an hour afterwards?
I am concerned about CJ because they've been so consistent, starting the season so well, then falling off so hard in the middle, and then after 5.5 going on this massive tear again. So I'm just not confident that they're going to do well if they go to MSI, right?
Yeah.
They've been so inconsistent this season.
I don't think CJ is going to MSI though.
Yeah, that would be really, really surprising.
I mean, even if they beat SKT, which is a big if, who says they're going to beat GE Tigers?
Right.
In a best of 5.
Yeah, it's pretty unlikely.
I still think SKT is going to win this one. I agree, though. I think CJ can take games for sure, but I think SKT has to win this.
CJ looked really good, and I think it's worth watching the series if you haven't seen it, just to see how fast they can close out a game, because they punished every little mistake that Jin Air made beautifully.
Okay, then the other question, Monte, is will we see Bengi in all the games for SKT?
I don't know. I would be worried if I was Koma, SKT's coach, about putting in a player in a high-pressure situation like this that hasn't been in a high-pressure situation before. Because, of course, he was playing against Samsung and IM, and the GE games, even though he performed well, were meaningless in terms of their results. So he's yet to be put in a situation where he can, it's all on his shoulders, right? So I don't know who we're going to see, actually. I would, if I was in SKT and I was making the decision, I would put in Bengi just because he's a more known quantity.
In the long run, would you rather that Tom eventually becomes the main jungler and he's the starting guy and they just phase Bengi out?
Yes. From what I've seen. I have a very small sample size to say that. I've only seen Tom play 6 games. 4 of them were against really bad teams. But he's mechanically better. He's better at team fighting. And he has shown some intelligence in where he puts, pressure on the map against GE, especially in that game 1 when he played Nunu and really just mind-gamed Lee for a long time by trying to take Dragon over and over again to make sure that Marin was safe on the top side, even though he didn't have Flash. So I like what we're seeing from him. He's like a mechanically better version of Bengi. I also don't know how he performs in a non-tank meta because I haven't seen that. I don't know what his Lee Sin looks like, for example.
True. Okay, do you have anything final to address on this episode, or are we done?
I think we can be done.